Hey, what's happening, everyone? Welcome to Normal America Show. I'm your host, robnoerr. I was just fighting with my friends in our fantasy football group chat. There's nothing better than hassling friends. Well, that's not true. Hassling your spouse, that's the tippy top. It gets me through the day. Hassling my wife. I don't know. I've seen these like stages of marriage charts. I don't know what stage is making the same joke every day until it drives your spouse crazy. But that's where I'm at. Hope you all are having a great day. We got another Spaces coming up here with me and John Burk. Today it's going to be the White House empowering Kamala Harris to fight Islamophobia. I'll put the link out to John's tweet here where you'll be able to join that Spaces. Look, really would appreciate if we have some people from my audience kind of join that space and speak up. We'll definitely make sure that you get a voice, even people that would disagree with the tenor that me and John are talking about on a particular topic, because what ends up happening is most of the people that are speaking are from John's audience, and it seems that we have some serious disagreements on several topics, including whether or not you should go ahead and vote for Donald Trump if he wins the primary. I'm of the camp that even if I maybe am leaning towards DeSantis right now, though it's really close, that certainly I would vote for either Trump or DeSantis, whoever wins that primary. I think that there's a lot at stake, and we can't risk either the neocons or, the Joe Biden neoliberal whatever garbage, having another term. So that's my feelings on it. I'm fighting an uphill battle, it seems, with many of the people on this Spaces. So not that I need the help, but let's be honest, I need the help. What's up, Achilles? It's great to see everyone. Spaces should be starting here in a couple minutes. But I'm having a great day today. Nothing going on today. I went and I saw my parents last night with my son Hank, and he's a hoot. They got like chinchillas and a parrot, and he just thought that was the coolest thing ever. I will never own a bird. My parents had parrots growing up, and they're so messy, man. They're just crazy. I always have problems finding John's, Here we go. Are you there now, John? Alright, we're up. Jamming tunes here, huh? Here's the link to the Spaces. I'll put it multiple times. I hope you all can still hear me. Again, remember, the whole point of a Spaces is to encourage people from the audience to participate. So feel free. Don't feel like you have to have any special talent, or I don't, and I do this almost daily. So it should be fun.
Hey, what's going on, guys? What up, Rob? Can you hear me loud and clear?
I got you, man. Great to be here.
Rob, I invited you to be hold on. I invited you to be
Yep.
co-host.
Can you hear me? I'm on. I took the
Just shout to the invite, Rob.
Yep, I took it. Can you
Let
hear
me know when you got it, buddy.
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me? Anyone else, can you raise your hand if you could hear me right now, just to make sure that, because sometimes I know the audio gets wonky. So any of the people in the audience, if you could just hit the emoji to raise your hand if you could hear me right now. Okay. Maybe I'll leave and come back. Check. Okay. Yeah, you could hear me.
All right, so while Rob figures out once post invite, let me read the viewers in space what we're talking about in regards to the topic in the space. So the White House is slammed for anti-tone-deaf unveiling of anti-Islamophobia strategy as anti-Semitism surges. The Biden administration faced backlash Wednesday after announcing that it would develop the first ever U.S. national strategy to counter Islamophobia in the U.S. amid rising levels of anti-Semitism. The White House's focus on combating Islamophobia comes one day after both the arrest of a 21-year-old self-identified Hamas fighter in New York who allegedly threatened to kill and rape Jews at Cornell University, and FBI Director Wray telling senators that anti-Semitism is reaching historic levels in the U.S. following Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. For years, Muslims in America and those perceived to be Muslims have endured a disproportionate number of hate-fueled attacks, Vice President Kamala Harris said on a video posted to Twitter. As a result of the Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, we have seen an uptick in anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-Semitic, and Islamophobic incidents across America, she added, referencing the brutal slaying of a 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy in Chicago last month. This is where we're at, folks. This is exactly where we're at. The White House is now taking the position of actually going out there and trying to combat Islamophobia, yet I haven't really seen them apply this much energy to going after anti-Semitism. Now, I have seen them make statements in regards to that, but at the same time, it's just, yeah, I'd like to see that same energy matched. We're going to go to hands. Rob.
Yeah, can you hear me here?
Yeah, I got you now, Rob.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic. I'll give sort of my opening comment on this. You remember when there was a trans shooter that shot up a school in Nashville and killed children, and then a bunch of people, in my words, committed an insurrection by mobbing the congressional seat there in Nashville and saying that there were 6 victims. One of the victims was the actual trans shooter. And then the Biden administration started to talk about, oh man, transphobia is so bad. This is what cultural Marxism does to you. This is what the establishment, and particularly the Democratic Party, this is how they thrive. They view everything through an oppressor versus oppressed lens. And so when a person that's in the oppressed group commits a crime, they don't look at it like it's a crime. They look at it like, oh, they couldn't help themselves. They were born into this situation where they're perennially impressed and therefore they could do no wrong and they're victims. And you see this with people in the black community, or you see this if an immigrant commits a crime, or you see it if an LGBT person commits a crime. And now this is exactly what you're seeing. It's the exact same thing. A person representing a group commits some sort of heinous crime, and their defense is, instead of, oh my God, they targeted this other group, they targeted Jews, or they targeted white people, or they targeted Christians, they instead defend the group of the person that committed the offense. And this just goes to show you, the Biden administration's just pandering for this. They see the polling, they see that Democrats are upset, or some people in the Democratic Party are upset because they see them as too strongly favoring Israel. And so the Biden administration's trying to have the cake and eat it too. They're like, well, we'll send the $14 billion to Israel, but we'll put out a statement saying, oh, Islamophobia is bad, as if we can't transparently see through it. If you're a left-winger that's really upset about what Israel's doing to Palestine, does this make you feel better? Oh, well, they're sending $14 billion, but they paid lip service to Islamophobia. It's garbage. It shows that they don't care about either side. They don't. They just care about pandering, trying to keep us divided, and trying to continue to win elections. So we should reject this. And there's so much more to say about this on this constant victimhood narrative. And it's not only bad, by the way, for the groups that are being targeted by the attack. So in this case, Jewish people that feel like they're under attack. It's also bad for the other group. It's also bad for Muslims. Like, if you need an example of this, look at how the pandering to the African American community, right? And you're told you can't discuss high crime rates in inner cities because, oh my goodness, that's racist to talk about that. But in reality, the people hurt the most by that are actual great people in the black community that have these disproportionate high numbers of homicides in their community, but we can never discuss it because supposedly it's racist. That's what this pandering does. It harms everything, it causes more division, and it just shows transparently that the people that are doing it don't care about any of the groups that are involved. Maybe John is working on something right now. So let's open it up to speaker. I'll say this one thing I want to say at the outset of this as well. I think that I'm so lucky to have someone like John that's helping me and leaving me be a part of a space like this. It really does mean a lot to me. But I think that the most important factor of this space is that we want to make sure that everyone that's listening that wants to has a voice and is able to be part of the conversation. If you're listening right now, you don't have to be something special. You don't have to be someone that's a prolific debater or prolifically follows politics or something like that to give us your opinion. You don't even have to agree with us. The only thing we ask is that you have a little thick skin. Sometimes we could be a little abrasive, but I assure you the entire reason for this space is to get as many people as possible involved in the conversation. So don't be intimidated. Don't think that just because you disagree with us, we don't welcome your voice. We absolutely do. We're not like the censorious left. We don't need to rely on censorship of those that we disagree with in order to get our point across. So please, 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 if you have anything that you would like to add, or if you want to, we would really appreciate if you retweet this, if you reach out to other people, if you think they'd like to listen or think that they would have something to add. John and I would really appreciate it. We think that's what will make this space an even better place, because it's a place where we understand it's not just John and I talking. We want to make sure that everyone has a voice. So, Red Warrior, I see that you have speaker permissions. If you'd like to go ahead and start with some of your thoughts that you have on this topic.
Well, thank you, Rob. Howdy. Nice to meet you. Can you hear me good? My connection in my kitchen is.
No, you sound great. You probably sound better than I do.
Oh, I highly doubt it. You sound like you're coming through a mic. Anyways, enough with the niceties. I completely and fully agree with you. All of it is pandering. They don't care about either side. They just care about maintaining their heightened status as political woke warriors, and by pandering to Islamophobia, because that's where the left takes its place. It doesn't take a stance on anti-Semitism. It likes to call us Nazis, but when this sort of thing happens, it likes to shout Palestinian genocide. And just this morning, it was finally rebuked, this idiotic claim that Israel bombed a refugee camp, which was completely false. And we had every reason to believe it was false because it came directly from Hamas. And it just shows a complete lack of understanding and I'll say social awareness of the situation and the importance of the situation. And it shows they just don't care. I have Islamic friends. Half of my friends are Islamic. In fact, the majority of them are. I don't know why. They just adopted me. I get along with them great. My buddy is from Lebanon. His dad was imprisoned in Syria for a month on false accusations because he was trying to escape the draft their version of a draft in Lebanon. And now he's a successful business owner here. And it's, if anything, yeah, it's real. And there are people who are extremely inconsiderate to someone because they're Muslim. And I do think that if you're a Muslim that lives in America, most of the time, unless you came here illegally, by nature of living in America, you reject the extremism that exists over the pond, because literally we are elevated in a stance of, we are seen as the ultimate immorality. We are seen as the ultimate rebellious crowd to them by nature of our freedom. They view us as the rebellious lost souls who hate them. And versus Israel, they view Israel and Jews as just being amoral and being enemies of Allah. And so I just wanted to say that as nature, if you are a Muslim who willingly moved here, you are rejecting a lot of the principles of extremist Islam. And I can't comment particularly on whether or not I think Islam is a religion of peace, but I'd rather not get into that because I don't like discussing or trying to do apologetics in a political space, because that's something meant for completely different purposes. But that was my stance. However, what we need to be focusing on is anti-Semitism, which is up by 1,200%, especially in Europe. Why don't we focus on that? It's the same thing. Like, stop Palestinian genocide. Well, like, look at the bodies of these Gazan babies. Well, where were you when the Israelis were being burned? Where were you when their women were being raped? Where were you then? You care about human decency, but where were you? Where were you when all this stuff was happening? And I'll leave it there.
No, thank you so much. I think that those are great points. I'll say this, just one particular thing you said, maybe to, you know, stir the pot a little. Maybe I'll get some people to disagree with me. I think one of the problems we have is that we've focused on anti-Semitism too much. That groups like the ADL have tried to claim that everything under the sun is anti-Semitism. If a white person gives the okay sign, they're an anti-Semite, they're a racist, right? And the problem is when you cry wolf like that over and over and over again, when you see actual anti-Semitism, people that literally want to wipe Jews off the face of the earth that are coming from the left, they don't know how to respond then. And a lot of this is a monster that they've created because, again, I go back to this oppressor versus oppressed mindset. A lot of people on the left use that in any way that they think benefits them. So if you're a conservative, if you're a Christian, if you're straight, if you're white, if you're male, etc., they say, oh, you're an oppressor, and we're oppressed because we're Jewish, and therefore we could join that crowd of people that are Muslims or people that are gay or people that are people of color, etc., and use that as a cudgel to go after political groups that we don't like. Well, the problem is, now that that's been watered down so much, what does it mean? What does it mean when someone calls you a racist now? I don't like racist. I don't have any time of day for them. But it's such an overused term at this point that you just laugh it off. The average person's tired of hearing it. And so while I agree that there is actual anti-Semitism, and certainly there is some on the right, I'm not going to lie about that. There are neo-Nazi groups and things like that that I condemn and think are despicable. But the institutional anti-Semitism that we've seen is because the same people that think that America is colonizers and that white people are evil, they don't differentiate Jewish people as being different from white people. Now, a lot of people that from groups like the ADL, of course I'm not talking about all Jewish people, but a lot of people that are Jewish on the left sort of embraced this sort of cultural Marxist feeling and said, yes, we should go after people that are criticizing aid to Israel that are on the right. They're anti-Semites, etc. Well, now the chickens have come home to roost. So I'm not saying forgo those people or not point out that there is actual anti-Semitism that's rising, like this kid at Cornell that's posting that he wants to kill Jewish people. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying it's time to say that, yes, we need to fight the anti-Semitism and bigotry against white people, Christians, and any other orthodoxy, ethnicity, etc. We should be fighting that while simultaneously realizing that you can't just use these accusations as a catch-all to people that want to legitimately criticize you. So we'll see what people think about that. Max, I see that you are lined up as a speaker. Did you have something to say, Max?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Coming through loud and clear, man.
All right, good. So first of all, John, I've been following you for a while. I've always liked your commentary. I know this is probably your third Twitter account you've had at this point or more. So as they keep playing whack-a-mole with you, you keep popping up and I keep following. So kudos to you for staying compelling for as long as you have. Yeah, all this has, I don't know how long this Islamophobia initiative has been in the pipeline. It's certainly awkward timing, and I could see where everyone would be led to believe that they just made this up in the last week and then it's come. All this is on the backdrop of an agenda by the radical left to really just gain and maintain as much power as quickly as possible. Because of the internet and the ability of us to communicate and really. If we go on long enough with free speech to be able to really put to bed any notions of them giving power very soon. That's why they're trying to control the internet so much. So excuse me if I ramble a little bit too much on this. I'm trying my best. So all this is in that backdrop. And uncontrolled mass migration, predominantly from North Africa and the Middle East, is part of their tool chest, along with the panic button that is climate hysteria, in order to facilitate that mission of maintaining power as quickly as possible. I think the insistence on focusing on Islamophobia now is because things have popped off in Israel and Palestine. That presents a problem because as this mission of mass migration has gone forward, we've seen increasing strife and intolerance pop up. And because this conflict popped off in Israel, we're now seeing a lot of misbehavior, certainly in rhetoric, I know people have been hurt, and I'm sure, unfortunately, more people will be physically hurt in our countries in these protests and so on, of no fault of their own as time wears on here. And I don't want to say that happened, but it probably will. And they don't want to give up their mission of using mass migration as a cudgel. And so they want to use Islamophobia as a cudgel as well. That if people start seeing a lot of migrants act up, then they're going to be, and by the way, talking about it, that's the main thing. They don't want people to openly communicate. And that's why Twitter, being what it is now, is a lot better than it was before. And it's essential, really. They want to be able to use Islamophobia as a cudgel to silence speech, because if too many people are starting to talk about what they're seeing, this intolerance in light of the conflict that's broken out within our countries, they might start to question the validity of the mass migration agenda that we've seen over the past several years. And they don't want to give up that device in their tool chest that they can use for the purpose of power politics. They don't want to give that up yet. The power is the most important thing. So it seems to be, again, I don't know how long this initiative was in the pipeline. It could have been a year out and it's just an awkward time. But they don't want to, they could have put a pause on it. They could have not done it. Any number of things. They want to trudge forward because they want that power and they don't want to give it up. They don't want to give up the tools in their tool chest. And I think that's what we're faced with. So like with anything, the most important thing is we need to advocate for free speech. People should not be afraid to speak their mind. You shouldn't be prejudiced against any individual for their religion or creed, certainly. But if you notice intolerance, you have to speak up about it. And this is just an effort to stifle that, because it'll get in the way. Further conversation along these lines will get in the way of a device in their children's chest, which is mass migration. And if people start questioning that too much, they'll be faced with a real problem. Similarly, along the lines with the climate hysteria. So they don't want any piece in their tool chest taken away. And that's how I see it. And I hope we can turn things around, but I'm not shocked to see this awkward timing. Wish they had more tact to have not done this right now, but they just can't help themselves. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Max. I think the timing's not a mistake. Like, let's assume for a second that they had this in the pipeline for a while. That's totally reasonable. That could be something that was there. Why wouldn't they delay it? Well, for me, this is the exact time that they would want to do something like this, because you talk about tools in their tool chest. Again, they want to keep us divided. You see, the Democratic Party and the establishment politicians in this country and institutions around the world, including in the United States, they don't really care about the average people. They don't care about the average citizen in Israel. They don't care about the average citizen in Palestine. They don't care about Ukrainians. They don't care about Russians. They don't care about Americans. What they seek to do is separate themselves as a second class of human citizen, where they think that they're better than everyone else, and they want sort of a neo-feudalism where everyone relies on these people in positions of power, and they're the movers and shakers, and we just get our bread and circuses and shut up and become obedient. That's what they want. And as such, one of the tools they use is keeping us divided based on a bunch of sort of immutable characteristics, such as your religion, your race, etc., and things like that. And one of the things they do in their mindset of saying that certain groups are oppressors and certain groups are oppressed is, if a group from the oppressed group does something, if a person or a movement from in that group does something, then they inverse the situation. They say, no, it's actually that group that is the victim. Again, if you look at the trans Nashville shooter, was that the time when you had a radical trans person that apparently had a manifesto that, oh, by the way, we're still not able to see? If it's a right-winger that shoots up people, boy, we get that manifesto within a week. But if it's a trans shooter that's shooting Christian children, we can't see that. It would be dangerous for the public to see it. So why is it that that's the very point that they decided to come out and talk about trans victims? Because it seeks to obfuscate what everyone sees, what's happening in objective reality. The truth is, every group, based on any characteristic, I don't care if it's race, ethnicity, religion, etc., any of those groups will have great people and bad people. Many of those groups have more good people than bad people. For example, if you're a Christian, you would say, I think that the bulk of Christians are great people, and that's a better religion than Muslims. Whatever, I'm not here to discuss those differences between religion, but what I'm saying is, you could find a bad Christian. You could find a bad white person. You could find a bad black person. The question is, how do you highlight those things? I've said this for years. we have a country with a police force that over 1 million people in law enforcement in this country, right? Everybody has a smartphone with a camera. You could take any group you want if you had a camera and find some sort of footage of a law enforcement person behaving inappropriate to that group. Black, Muslim, lesbian. I'm sure you could find a police officer doing something bad to a member of that group. And then all you have to do is record it and then post it online, and everyone's like, look how horrible this country is to black, Muslim, lesbians. You could certainly find litany of videos of police being terrible to white men. You can also find a litany of videos of police being awesome and risking their lives and doing great things. But what do the people in charge of these institutions decide to highlight? And so, given that we could say that about any group, when we see something terrible happen through an Islamic terrorist group, Hamas, and we see how horrific they've been, and we see many, many people, including people in positions of power or positions of privilege, like those at Harvard, or people that are protesting in London, that are saying, like, death to the Jews and things like that. They seek to obfuscate that because it kind of shatters their illusion of, these groups are oppressed. So this is the exact time when we see so much hatred being directed from people that are defending Hamas towards Jewish people. This is the exact time that they would come out with something like this. Because they're like, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. They only have one tool in the playbook, and that's to cause this sort of division. And so their tool is going to be saying, see, the real victims are Muslims. The real victims after a trans shooter kills a bunch of Christian kids are trans people. That's the only, so I'm not, like, if they were people that meant well and they were like, no, we were just literally, we planned on raising the dangers of Islamophobia. We planned on talking about that, and it just so happened to be bad timing. It coincided with this. Then they would have delayed it. But the timing is the point. This is exactly when they would do something like this. And it further goes to show that they are wanting you to deny what your eyes see. They want you to deny reality. When you deny reality, and they ask you to do it in a litany of ways, there is no biological difference between men and women, then they have you. Just like in the book 1984. Why was it so important they got Winston to say 2 + 2 is 5? Because if they could beat you down willfully enough for you in your head to deny reality, then they control you. So anyone else that would like to join up, just go ahead and request speaker permission. We'll make sure we get you in here. Let's see. Max, Red Warrior, did you have anything? John, if you could hear, if you want to jump in, feel free. If not, I could continue to riff on this. So if Max, Red Warrior, you don't have anything to say, that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's the thing is, what you really brought into perspective is that all of this is social. This is stuff we deal with socially. These are things that we fight socially. If there was, for example, some kind of law that put down Jewish people, or a law that put down Muslims, or a law that put down men, or a law that put down women, that's when we would take things into the legal government sphere. But until then, the government really has nothing to say about it other than to represent us, vote for laws that make our lives easier, and help bring us prosperity instead of bringing us down, and propel our values and make sure we don't get blown up by some crazy dude in turban somewhere. And that was directed at Iran, not Muslims as a whole. But anyways, as I was saying, lost my footing.
You're doing great.
All of this is social. All of this is social. These are things we fight socially. If there are people who are racist, we call them out. We say, "What's wrong with you, man?" Usually, when I can't remember his name, but he's this African American gentleman who I think he might be a preacher or a pastor or something, and he goes and he talks to current Klan members, and he convinces them to not do it just by talking to them and by getting to know them and by being nice to them and letting them know that he's human. And then they give him their robes because they're like, "I hate what this stands for now." Like that. That's what I mean. We fight these things socially. These manners of hatred. We fight these things socially, and protect the freedom of speech so that we can do that. What the heck is crawling up my leg?
You see, the government they
Like,
sent something to you. You start speaking out in
The
this stuff,
Biden
and all of a sudden-
roach.
Yeah, the Biden roaches are coming for you.
Biden.
I got to jump in here real quick, guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Them
yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right, perfect. Yeah. So I like what the previous speaker was saying as far as it's not the government's role, it's not the government's job. I fully agree. I think the government needs to stay out of it. If we want to talk about anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, it is not the government's role to step in there and say, this is what you should or shouldn't do. This is baseline around morality. And I get that people are like, look, we can all agree. We can all come to the main conclusion that racism is bad. We should not be racist. But what role is it of the federal governments to step in and say, look, this is right, this is wrong? That's not their job. And again, I think this is another symptom of a society that is ran screaming to mommy government anytime something goes wrong. This is voters' fault. Every single Democrat, every single conservative, every single voter that has ran out there and looked to the government to be the source or fix of their problem are automatically wrong. But I want to talk about like the timing of this. I don't think this is in the pipeline. The last time we saw massive levels of Islamophobia unjustly applied was, I want to say, like immediately post 9/11. And we all know why. We get it. Like, was it wrong? Absolutely it was wrong. We never should have done that. You know, we can't sit there and generalize people to that level, to that degree. But, you know, there is something to be said because I saw people bringing up the ideas of Japanese internment camps in World War II. Like, oh, it was wrong. It's like, look, here's the issue, though. If you want to delve into the weeds on this, there was actually Japanese American citizens feeding intelligence back to how they're supposed to handle it. I'm not saying it was justified with. I'm not saying that at all. I was like, but the reasoning and behind all this stuff, the government, like I say, always has the quote unquote best of intentions to restrict your freedom. So it's not that I'm in agreement with the internment camps, but look as to the reasoning as to why they did it. And that's what we see here. Now it's Islamophobia. Really? In the aftermath of 400 Jews being murdered. And they want to come out there and say, no, really, the Muslims. And I agree with Rob. It's always the opposite. The opposite's always the victims. Like, oh, the poor people, they're oppressed. Look why they do that. Meanwhile, the families of the murder victims just sitting there looking at you like you got a dick growing out of your forehead. It's like, are you really kidding me with this? Are you kidding me with this? You're siding with the terrorists. You're siding with the criminals. You're siding with those that are like rooted in immorality. I've seen Islam practice at its root core. I've seen Islam in the Middle East for 4.5 years. It is most certainly not a religion of peace. I will argue that till I'm blue in the face. Now, you can talk about Western Islam and say it's more peaceful. Fair enough. But then we still had the Boston City Marathon bombing. We still had many different things out there. That wasn't the Christians. Now, I'm not saying Christians don't have blood on their hands. Of course they do. Every religion has its zealots. But more often than not right now, as the saying goes, like, look, not every Muslim is a terrorist, but every terrorist that we've seen thus far since 9/11, even before that, has been Muslim. Now, you can also redefine what terrorism actually constitutes, being a religious movement or something in political, like look at the IRA. I'm not really sure if people consider them terrorists, even though they do use violence to perpetuate a political narrative, which does match the definition of terrorism. But at root point, the point that I'm really trying to hammer on is it is not the government's role to dictate to a free people what is morally right, what is morally wrong. It's not their role. But I always find it just very funny that how you had all these pro-Palestinian protests all over the country. All over the country. Hold on.
Don't forget the
Excuse me, I had to sneeze. All over the country, pro-Palestinian protests. You know, I didn't see Jews out there. I don't see Jews out there on social media. I know this is anecdotal, but I can't find things where Jews are going out there throwing mice in a McDonald's to protest the war in Israel. I'm not seeing Jews do this. Excuse me. But what I do see are pro-Palestinians taking to the streets here in Dallas. Thousands upon thousands take to the streets to say, end the war, genocide, blah, 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 pro-Palestine, poor Muslims, yada, yada, yada. What does the government do? I mean, do you really think the government would come out there and make an anti-Semitism is on the rise? Now we're starting up a coalition of whatever to support, you know, Jews being targeted. Well, now you're favoring a certain people. I mean, doesn't that give the impression you're favoring a certain people? Look, it's illegal. I mean, it's illegal to assault somebody, but it's not illegal to have free speech. If people want to come out there and protest, you know, pro-Palestine BS, feel free. Just you're putting a mark on your back and say, hey, I'm a fucking idiot is what you're basically saying. And that's fine with me. And I'm glad. I mean, and think about this think about this from a Twitter social media standpoint. How many of these MAGA people, not even just MAGA, I'm sorry, I cannot even just include MAGA, it's everybody. How many on the right? And Rob is correct. We do have a massive anti-Semitism problem on the right. Guys that's, well, we just need to have the conversation of, you know, Jewish nepotism. It's like, fine, if that's the conversation you want to have, I get that. It's like, but it never stops there. Because usually, more times often than not, I know everybody in this space can attest to this, that usually it starts off with, well, what about Jews that run the banks in Hollywood and control the money, yada, yada, yada. But it doesn't stop there. Then the USS Liberty gets brought up, all the stuff. So where there's smoke, there's fire. And like, again, I don't sit there and consider the criticism of the state of Israel to be anti-Semitic. Not entirely. But when people usually start off, and I'm not saying everyone does this, but normally that's the route that I see happening. So yes, we do have a massive anti-Semitism problem on the right. But still, It is not the government's role to dictate to a free people what is right and what is wrong. It is their role to, number one, protect the sovereignty of the nation, which is the southern border. They've done nothing on this, and ensure that the America is protected. And everything, I mean, it's in the Constitution. It's written in the freaking Constitution. This is not the role of the government.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let me talk just real quick about anti-Semitism on the right, just to give an illustration. I totally get people's thinking right now, Israel's going too far right now. That doesn't make you an anti-Semite. I get people that say AIPAC has too much of an influence. That doesn't make you an anti-Semitic. I believe a lot of that. I believe that this government is too interested in foreign governments that they're beholden to, like Israel, Ukraine. It is perfectly in bounds to criticize that and not hate people for their ethnicity. However, there's certainly a huge problem with it on the left that's worse, because the left actually has institutional power. No one cares what a neo-Nazi says. No one cares what a member of the KKK says, at least when it comes to them having institutional power. If you are found out to be a member of one of those groups and you're trying to run for Congress, that's a death sentence. You're not going to get any position of power. However, it is erroneous to pretend that it's not a serious problem on the right as well, even if it's less of an institutional problem. I one time was debating two people that I don't know that they would publicly say it, but honestly, they were white nationalists. And one of the things that was going on during our discussion was they brought up the Rittenhouse case. And they said, this is what they told me in that debate. They said, it's not a coincidence that everyone from the police officers to the prosecutors to the judge involved in prosecuting Rittenhouse are Jewish. And I was like, what? And I started to look at the names of the prosecutors and of the judge, and let's just say they didn't sound like Jewish names. And they were like, well, maybe not that one. Now, that's a question that no normal person would have even thought of. Like, wait, what? You bothered to look into the ethnicity of the prosecutor, of the judge? But in these anti-Semites' mind, where it's like everything that ever happened that is terrible is the responsibility of Jewish people, it's just nonsense. It's starting with the conclusion that Jewish people run everything and are evil, and then trying to shoehorn every fact within it. That means you're an anti-Semite. If you're correctly pointing out, like, look, I think that there's a disproportionate amount of Jewish people that are involved in lobbying, and that makes the United States government do more things that are more favorable to the people of Israel than they should be, that's a reasonable criticism. So I 100% agree with John there. The other thing I want to say real quick about the role of government, words are cheap, right? Anytime the government comes out and says, like, we're going to pass a resolution condemning X, they're full of it. That's just virtue signaling garbage. Actions are what are important. So, for example, again, from the perspective of someone who's upset with the Biden administration because they're sending money to Israel. And let's say you're a left-winger that thinks Israel's committing a genocide right now in Palestine. I'm not saying you have to agree with that. I'm just saying for the sake of argument, think of what those people are thinking of right now. So they think the United States is funding the Israeli government to commit genocide in Palestine by proposing sending them $14 billion. And so then Biden comes out and goes, oh, but we're speaking out against Islamophobia. That's a level of pandering that should outrage you if you're those people. And the same is true of all of the times that our federal government seeks to speak up and condemn certain forms of hate. For example, we're told that our government routinely speaks up and condemns hate, and yet they have policies that are expressively anti-white and anti-Christian. We see the FBI that was targeting Catholics. We see the FBI that was targeting pro-life people. We see when there was talk of the vaccine being this end-all, be-all great thing, the CDC recommended giving it to, quote, non-essential workers before elderly people because there were more black people in the non-essential workers. In other words, this allegedly life-saving medication, we can't give it to the people that need it most, the elderly, because there's too many white people in that group. We see that they propose giving farmers money that were struggling during the lockdowns they imposed. Oh, but only black farmers. They weren't going to give it, only people of color that were farmers. We see them giving money to LGBT groups. And you know, when Ilhan Omar allegedly said something anti-Semitic before, and Republicans demanded that there was a resolution censuring Ilhan Omar or criticizing Ilhan Omar's comments, which I could speak on that all day. The Democrats put forth a resolution and passed it. And if you read that resolution, it was mind-boggling. Again, the accusation was that one of their congresspeople said something that was anti-Semitic. So you would expect the resolution to say when Muslims do things that are anti-Semitic or when Democrats do things that are anti-Semitic. But no, if you read the resolution, all it was we condemn anti-Semitism and bigotry against gay people and sexism against women and racism against black people and Islamophobia. And then they gave specific examples, and every example was white people doing something bad. They didn't say, oh, and when Muslim members of Congress say something anti-Semitic. So this is the trick they always use. They won't adhere to the same rules that they want to apply to you. This virtue signaling, it's just to appease so they can pretend with all of these morons, particularly on the left, that buy this stuff, that look at the worldview of everything is about racism and everything's about bigotry and things like that. They pay lip service. They don't care. The Democratic Party doesn't care about gay people. They don't care about Muslims. They don't care about Jews. They don't care about any of these groups. They care about entrenching their power. And the last thing I'll say is, if you need an example of how this plays out, at one point in this country, the bank Chase Bank was accused of predatory lending towards the African American community. When the George Floyd Black Lives Matter riots started to break out, I remember seeing this image of, I think it was in Milwaukee or something, this city block that all of the stores' windows were smashed, people's homes' windows smashed, fires that were lit and stuff like that, except one building stood tall. It was Chase Bank. Because in their window, they had a sign that said, Black Lives Matter. That, in a nutshell, is exactly what's going on here. We could do whatever we want. We could have policies that hurt Muslims and hurt Jews and hurt Christians. It doesn't matter, because as long as we use cheap words to say, oh, we're condemning Islamophobia, oh, we're condemning anti-Semitism, then everyone looks the other way and thinks that it's okay.
Very well said. We've got some more requests. We got Melissa. Melissa requested to speak. Go ahead, Melissa.
Hey guys, thanks for having me up. So I remember the words like, if you see something, say something. So now that they're going with Islamophobia, how many people are not going to say something if they see something because they're afraid that they'll be deemed as an Islamophobic? I'm going to put up in the nest tweet that Christopher Wray, he's saying that there will be inspired attacks, terrorist attacks. So that's the whole thing. It's kind of like an oxymoron. Like, are people going to stop reporting suspicious activity because they're afraid they're going to be deemed an Islamophobic? Thank you, guys.
No, absolutely. I think we lost Rob. Absolutely. It's only going to heighten the matters further. It's just kind of like, if you want something downplayed, it's the basic rule on the internet. Like, if you don't want something talked about, don't say anything. Kind of like when somebody says, hey, man, I really hate it when so-and-so does this specific thing. And then everybody in the comments proceed to do that same thing. That's the thing that is annoying about it, is that because when the White House says, and they know they do this, when they say, we need to stop Islamophobia, it's going to put more of a spotlight on that. And yes, it's only going to heighten things. People are going to start looking. It's going to increase people like watching Islam or watching Muslims. The benefits of this are they're horrendous. And the fact that they're doing this, again, it's a massive government overstep. But again, this is what they do. This has been something they always go out there to do. Like Rob says, they do it to, entrench themselves and securing power. For me, I think it's a little bit more. Well, I think it's that, but it's also simply votes. It's pandering for votes. They want the Muslim vote. They want because again, the turnout in the streets, far more Muslims protesting than Jews. So I think the government's kind of choosing its stance here instead of like, why did they come out there and say, we need to combat anti-Semitism? No, it was Islamophobia. So on the public perception, you've picked a side. You don't need to do that. Your biggest thing is, like I said, national sovereignty. But again, anytime the government interjects itself into something like this, watch for the infringement, because it's slowly right behind it. We saw, hey, the neocons went the opposite direction with it. It's like, hey, it's the Muslims. Well, guess what? Now we got the Patriot Act, because if you're a suspected terrorist, because you're saying things. And, I was 17 at the time that went into effect. I didn't know anything about politics. So my line of thought was, well, if you don't have anything to hide, what are you worried about? It's like, but that's not the point, though. The point is they are infringing on the rights of free people. And again, watch, they're going to try and do this again in some way, shape, or form. And I've had this conversation so many times. I think if people want to be Islamophobic, if people want to be transphobic, and we also have to discuss the fact of what constitutes Islamophobia, because we've seen, if you disagree with transgenderism, you're automatically a transphobic person. That's not true. Phobia means to denote the fear of. I'm not afraid of trans people. I am disgusted by them. I think they are mentally inept. I think they need help. I think that devolved into the butchering of our children. But does that make me a transphobic? No, it doesn't make me transphobic whatsoever. So Rob talked about how, you know, we regurgitate the word so many different times. It's like that game Gossip, you know. You sit in a circle, and I lean to my left, and I say something to my partner, whoever's on my left. You only can say it one time, and they have to repeat this all the way down until it comes back to you. And you'll know more times than not that the original statement or word you said is clearly distorted. And this is what happens with every buzzword, dog whistle, the left, the White House, the government tends to use. Islamophobic, what is Islamophobia? And here's the other part is, do people have a right to be afraid of Islam? Look what's happening on the international stage. Hamas, the leader of Hamas comes out and said October 7th will happen again. We will be martyrs. We will do this, yada, yada, yada. I mean, people kind of have a right to be scared of Muslims right now because we've seen the violence perpetuated by them for so long. Now, again, this is not to say that, again, the Christians don't have blood on their hands, but I don't see Christians flying planes into World Trade Centers. So, and the reason that I'll drive this point home is, like I talked about on the show the other day, you can't tell me if you're on a plane and there's two Middle Eastern people there and one of them says Allah Akbar, your butthole isn't going to clench. Why? Because you've been conditioned to think that way based upon evidence showcased by that religion for so long. Is this me saying that all Muslims are bad? Of course not. But we cannot sit there and take the high road and say, well, you know, generalities don't apply. Well, if something is generally true more times than it's not, then the generality actually has some certain inherent level of truth to it. But again, like I said, the point still stands. It's not the government's role. Everything I've just said is obsolete if the government would just shut the hell up and stay out of it. Rob, I approved your request, sir. I'm not sure why. Yeah, there you go. You should be good now, Rob. Go ahead, Red Warrior.
I'm back.
All right, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you once you got it. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, look, it's a difficult conversation to say this about Islam. I think that I've stuck up. I know Muslims that are great people. I'm a Christian, but I'm what many Orthodox Christians would say is a bad Christian. I'm not someone that could quote you chapter and verse of the Bible. I'm someone that truly believes that although I believe that the way to live your life is easiest to come through Christianity, I believe that you could become a moral person who I agree with that's interested in advancing our civilization forward through other means, whether that be Islam, Judaism, atheism, whatever. If your actions make you a good person, I don't care if someone says, well, that's not true Islam. You're ignoring this passage when you're out there being a good person and talking to Christians and working for the benefit of the United States, etc. I don't care about any of that. I think there are good Muslims that fled this nonsense, as the caller said earlier. And oftentimes what you see in this country is a lot of Islamic terrorism are second-generation Muslims. So you'll be some Muslim that fled someplace like Palestine or Iran or something like that. You come here because you value things like our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And then your kids rebel against you and they go into the opposite direction of this religious orthodoxy and terrorism and things like that. So I'm not begrudging all Muslims. Don't get it twisted. I also think the Patriot Act and a lot of the actions after 9/11 were despicable that happened to broad brush labeling every Muslim in this country as a potential terrorist. I think that's despicable. However, having said all of that, let's not kid ourselves. Anytime that Islam becomes intertwined in politics in a nation, it is an abject disaster for the values that we think are important, such as free speech or your ability to be an individual and things like that. And I remember, does anyone remember the famous, although I hate him, Sam Harris, when he was on Bill Maher's show years ago with Ben Affleck, and he's correctly talking about, yes, it's true that only around 5% of people that practice Islam are involved in terroristic type activities. But that's not even the problem. The problem is the next group that's like the 15% that thinks that's okay. That's the problem. That, when you're talking about a religion of over 1 billion people, is a millions upon millions of people that think it's okay for us to use violence to achieve our religious and political ends. That's not acceptable. And it's okay to call that out. That doesn't mean you're an Islamophobe. It doesn't mean when you look at Hamas that's openly out there saying, listen, we want to wipe the nation of Israel out. We want to go after Jewish people around the world. We think they're a blight. That doesn't mean it's Islamophobia to say we refuse to accept that. You could still criticize Israel. Absolutely. That I don't have a problem. I've done it myself. That's absolutely reasonable. But we would be foolish to not act like that there's not a legitimate fear for groups that say things like that. Does anyone remember the Charlie Hebdo case where you had this French, I believe it was French, satirical magazine, basically like The Onion or the Babylon Bee. And they drew a picture of Muhammad, and Islamic terrorists broke in and executed, like 20-something people that were just comic strip writers. And all throughout this nation in the Western world, people claim to be outraged. Imagine being a journalist, imagine being an artist and seeing, my goodness, people are being executed for doing what we do every day. And many of them spoke strong words and said, oh, that's not a good thing to do. But would they show the picture of Muhammad? No, they wouldn't. Why? Because they were afraid. It went so far as Comedy Central told South Park that they couldn't have an episode that visualized Muhammad. And we all knew what it was. You could make fun of Jesus, you could make fun of Jewish people, and you weren't afraid that someone would break into your studio with AK-47s and blow your head off. But with Islam, it was different. And the idea that we have to be afraid to say that is nonsensical. The self-censorship is almost worse than the government censorship because there are just certain things we know we can't say. Now, this operates on a different scale with other groups, like you can't make fun of trans people because you'll get kicked off all these platforms, and if your boss finds out, you might get fired. But with Islam in particular, especially back then, it was a legitimate fear that you could be killed if you drew a picture of Muhammad, if you talked negatively about the actions that were taking place. And that's something that we should avoid in the strongest possible sense. The last thing I'll say is John is absolutely right that every one of you, every time you see this pandering from the U.S. government, but particularly from an administration like the Biden administration, just let it be known that this is the same group that's saying that it has to be necessary for them to have like sort of a czar of disinformation, right? That they need to censor disinformation online. You could mark these words right now. The government behind the scenes will be pressuring social media companies to censor people that are critical of Islam based on initiatives to fight Islamophobia. This is just another excuse for tyranny. Here's the truth. You in your heart know if you're a bigot. You know if you're a racist. You know if you're a sexist. If not, who cares what anyone calls you? You say what's in your heart. And it is not the role of our government. In fact, it's antithetical to the rules, to the Bill of Rights that the founders set forth, for our government to weigh in and say, oh, well, we have to be careful of this type of speech or that type of speech. It's enough for the government to say bigotry's wrong, racism's wrong, end of story. But instead, they selectively pick and choose at opportune times, like we see now. Oh, Hamas did something bad. We're going to fight Islamophobia because it's pandering that seeks to divide you and ultimately will seek to use actual actions to silence voices that are critical of the agenda that the government's doing.
Very well said. Red, over to you, sir.
I 100% agree in regards to it's all just pandering. That's all it is. It's just pandering. All they want is to get elected. They don't actually care. The reason we vote for the way we do is we vote so that the freedom of speech is protected, so that we can actually fight these things on the ground. That's another thing. Like usually the question is posed: would you allow Nazis to just march through the streets with their flags and wave them around and spread Jewish hate? Would you allow that? It was like, well, objectively, yeah, I would. And then what I would do is I would grab a sign. I would grab myself an Israel flag, and I would go to that whatever horrible rally they're hosting, and I would wave it in their face, and I would tell them how ignorant they are, because that's what this country is about. Their country is about actually combating hate and becoming a better society, because we exist in a free space where we can discuss these things and combat hate, and because of it, we have propelled ourselves to be this city on a hill. And I'd like to hear what you guys have to say in that regard.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I think you're right. I think that what we have to focus on is like, let's say you're a conservative, right? Like, you have to ask yourself, what is it that is sort of the biggest threat to sort of what it is that you're out there trying to achieve in this country? Let's say you're someone who believes in constitutional principles. Now, certainly some sort of, Islamic movement that would seek towards politicization in this country would be something that would be that you would reject. But is that where the strongest move is right now? No, the strongest move is people that will pay lip service to that in order to divide us as a country, right? And to me, I think that that's what this reeks of. It reeks of sort of more pandering that suggest this type of thing. One of the things I wanted to mention, John, we talked a little about yesterday when we saw Josh Hawley that was grilling Mayorkas, and Hawley was grilling Mayorkas partially on one of the agents at the border that on the day of October 7th, when this Hamas terror attack is taking place, she puts up an image of a paraglider with an AK and is basically celebrating. Now, this is celebrating the idea that you had actual troops that came in, or terrorists in this case, from Hamas, to places like a music festival and executed and did terrible things to civilians. Now, just to be clear, again, I'll say this and we can have this conversation. You could think that what Israel's doing is terrible. You could say that dropping a bomb on a population center is something to be condemned. Fine, we could have that conversation. But it is a level of evil further to directly be on the ground and directly, specifically targeting civilians with knives, with guns, in a personal touch. It's not a collateral damage at that point. It becomes the point to terrorize the civilian population of the group that you're going against. It is the definition of terrorism, and that is a level of evil. Again, you could say, I think Israel is evil for bombing a population center, but that's not the same level of evil of specifically shooting a baby in the head or specifically shooting a concert goer and things like that, right? That's a level of evil worse. And here we have a person that is an employee that our taxpayers are paying as a law enforcement person at the border. A border, by the way, that is so insecure that we could legitimately and probably do, and definitely do, have members of Hamas and Hezbollah that have came in. Your tax dollars paying for this employee to celebrate this terroristic attack. And Mayorkas does the same thing that you see Harvard and these other places doing. They say, well, free speech is important. So we didn't want to excoriate that person. We didn't want to punish that person because free speech is important. Maybe we could accept that if we didn't see that that doesn't apply when there's speech that's by far more benign, things like criticizing the federal government or talking about the importance of the Second Amendment or questioning the results of an election or questioning the official narrative on a pandemic. All of that stuff will get you fired. And if you don't believe it, ask yourself this. Let's say that the Tree of Life synagogue shooting happens, which was a far right-wing person that did that. If a member of border security, right, put up a post that day on social media celebrating that attack, do you think for a minute Mayorkas would have been like, oh, well, free speech, we have to keep that person employed? Of course not. There would have been universal condemnation for that person. How dare we have a government employee, particularly a member of law enforcement, that is celebrating a terroristic attack? How dare we? And yet, when it comes to a group that they label as oppressed, that they have to pander and pay lip service to, all of a sudden it's different. All of a sudden free speech matters. It's the same thing like we talked about yesterday that's happening on college campuses. You have Harvard, which I forget the name of the organization, what the acronym stands for, but the acronym is FIRE, and it has to do with free speech on college campuses. And every year they do this sort of ranking system of which colleges are the worst against free speech. Harvard is number 1 or 2 every year. You can't be a conservative. You can't be a Christian there and be a public speaker. The students that are polled routinely say conservatives feel that they can't express their voices on campus. The professors, the administrators, all radical lefties. And yet this one time, when we have people calling for death to Jews and things like that, all of a sudden Harvard's like, well, that's a free speech issue. They don't care about free speech. They don't care. What they care about is continuing this coalition of people that they claim are oppressed. And by the way, the coalition makes no sense. You remember the Orlando nightclub shooter where you had a Muslim shoot up a gay bar? All of a sudden in Orlando, you had all of these gay people that were like, listen, we want to learn how to defend ourselves. They're taking shooting classes. They're learning the importance of Second Amendment, which I absolutely applaud. They should be. But they were being told, shut up. You can't criticize Islam. It's nonsensical. The tenuous alliance that they have falls apart at face value. You mean to tell me you're the organization of radical Islam and the LGBT? Radical Islam wants to kill the LGBT. And yet we're told that it's Islamophobic to criticize that portion of Islam. So you can see that none of this has to logically make sense. And the reason it doesn't logically make sense is because it's not intended to. It's not serious. It's just pandering.
Go ahead, Brad. You had your hand up.
Yeah, hey buddies and buddy listeners. I just had something real quick. I kind of look at this from another angle. I think that Biden made a mistake. I think most of his voters are pro-Palestine, anti-Zionist, or whatever they want to say as far as the Zionist thing. Basically, they're anti having Israel having their own state, and I think that he made a mistake in this whole Islamophobia center to combat Islamophobia thing is just a start of a backtrack, I think.
No, I don't disagree. And that's exactly what I was saying when I said, listen, here's the thing. You have to take, it's not even the right way to put it. How do I phrase this? Like, despite the fact there are people that I have serious disagreements with to the point that I really don't care because they're bad faith actors, what they think of me, I do always try to put myself in the position of being good faith and thinking, well, what do people I disagree with think about this? So if I'm today putting myself in the shoe of someone like Aaron Mattei or Jimmy Dore or Glenn Greenwald, these are left-wingers that I agree with on certain things, such as I agree with them on the non-intervention stance in Ukraine. I agree with them on the authoritarianism that we see, particularly in Democratic circles like with the Biden administration, when it comes to censoring people that disagree with them and locking people up that are political prisoners and things like that. How do they feel today, right? I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they're good faith, and they think that Israel has all of these people in Gaza in an open-air prison and that this is a war of genocide that's being committed by Israel. Okay, well, if they think that, how would they think when the Biden administration is simultaneously sending $14 billion to Israel to continue this war, while simultaneously putting out messaging that they're criticizing Islamophobia? If I'm them, I'm agreeing with you 100%, Brad, that this is just the Biden administration trying to have a cheap political trick, pandering, because they realize amongst their own party, most of the Democratic Party will take the side of Palestine over Israel. And so therefore, by sending this money to Israel, that upsets their base. So what's a cheap way to continue to send that money? Because that's part of the agenda of our military-industrial complex and the uniparty that is the Republican and Democratic leadership, that they're going to keep funding places like Ukraine no matter what. They're going to keep funding places like Israel no matter what. That money matters. Those weapons, those are actual policies that matter. Cheap words mean nothing. And so this is just an attempt to repander to the Democratic base and say, oh, no, we get you. Biden's out there today saying, oh, yeah, actually, we want a ceasefire in Israel. Okay, if you're one of those Democrats, you say, sure, those are the words we want to hear. Now, how do you defend the $14 billion that's going to weapons in Israel? How do you defend that? So you're saying you want a ceasefire, but your actions and your money are suggesting the opposite. So I 100% agree with you, Brad. I think that they realize that polling, this hurts them in their base, and so they need to come out and pander. And the easiest thing in the world to do is to keep the exact same policies, but then put out meaningless resolutions like, oh, and by the way, we condemn Islamophobia. It means nothing. It is just transparently virtue signaling and pandering to try to help shore up their base.
I have to agree. I think that the White House is doing their best to do a fence riding operation here, one of the tightrope walking. We see Biden talking about that he wants to, we're sending packages over to Israel, and then also wanting to send humanitarian aid to Gaza, and you know how they say Gaza or they don't really say Palestine so much. It's more like Gaza. Gaza is comprised of Palestinians, because people have already started to associate, and correctly so, the Palestinian is ran by Hamas. That is a Hamas terrorist organization. It's a terrorist-run country. So all the White House is doing, I agree with Rob, it's fence-sitting. You're trying to appease both sides of this. Yet, in the end, Israel's an ally. Palestine is not. I don't understand this. I mean, I do. We all understand why they're doing this. But again, Rob's 100% of the money on this one. It's pandering at its finest. You're trying to play both sides of this. And quite frankly, if I was Israel, I'd be insulted by America right now. It's like, wait, you say you're our ally. You want to help us out, but you're also sending aid to Gaza, which we know is in the form of money, which we know that once received will not go into the hands of those that actually need it. Instead, it will go into the hands of the terrorist organization that runs that thing to purchase more weapons, more things like that. And it's funny to me because Austin Peterson just put out a hilarious tweet, and it's 100% on the money. He says that Israel uses rockets to protect its people. Hamas uses people to protect its rockets. We have seen this repeatedly. How many times do we have to see Hamas utilize their people as human shields? And so when you take these things into consideration, it's like, yes, we're going to fund them to continue doing this. It's like the whole border thing. Like Democrats like, no, there is no such thing as an illegal human being. They should be allowed to come across. Like, well, you do realize there's sex trafficking. 74% of women that get sexually assaulted in some way, shape, or form in that process of coming across the border. Fentanyl's flowing over. But you don't care about that. You just like to virtue signal upon how good of a person and human being you are. You don't factor in all these other details that are actually more dangerous, more threatening to human life than leaving the border wide open. It's the same rules apply here to Gaza and Palestine. Again, it is fence sitting at its finest, and quite frankly, it's not surprising. It is not surprising. And then, they're going to do this. The reason they do this is they know that the public expects them to say something. Everybody's like, why aren't you saying anything? And I love it how people are like protesting. We want, especially Americans, we want a ceasefire in Israel. Who the hell do you think you are? You're nobody to them. Like, you do not have the right to get involved in somebody else's ordeal and say they need to ceasefire. Bro, they had 1,400 people murdered. They had 1,400 people murdered, and you're telling them to just blow it off? Absolutely not. Their righteous indignation is 100% morally justified, in my opinion. So to sit there and say, all these people that want to sit there and pretend like Palestinians are the victims, you are sadly mistaken. Sadly mistaken. But, hey, just don't be Islamophobic. We can't do that. It's just stupid at this point.
I totally agree. And so I see someone in my chat that you won't be able to see, John, because it's on my channel, that are criticizing you because you're a monster that wants dead Palestinian babies. Let me push back on that for a second. Let's say that's true. For the sake of
I always love that. Yeah. I always love that because, the biggest counter I have to that is like, you better thank your God Almighty I wasn't in charge because I'd blow that place off the fucking map. You weak motherfuckers out there, I'm going to get one shit. You want dead baby. No, I want to keep my babies alive. And when it comes down to the juxtaposition of me versus you, the same thing with COVID and your grandma. She's dead. I will not sacrifice my freedoms because of your grandma. I don't give a fuck what you think. I hate those weak little panty-waisted pussies. They annoy me to no end because you can sit there. These people are the same libertarian types of trash that would get conquered so fucking easily, and they disgust me. You are so fucking weak, in my opinion. There is a difference to sit there and say, it's not our job, we should not get involved, stay out of it, which is my position. But if you harm one follicle of an American's head, in a terrorist-style attack, I will destroy you and everything you love and your entire fucking bloodline. I have no qualms about that. So what I will not do is sit here and try to appease to these weak-minded, weak-kneed, coward little fucks and say, oh, well, I don't give a fuck. If Hamas didn't give one shit about Israeli babies, then I'm sorry. Those Palestinian kids, it sucks, but that's war. We bombed Germany. Same thing. We bombed all these places and killed people that were innocent, but that is war. Welcome to the reality of what war entails, because many of you live in the safety bubble that you just don't fucking get it. There are people out there that want you dead because of your race, your religion, your sexuality, and them people ain't the fucking Jews. It's the Muslims. And if the Muslims want to go in there and resort to that level of tactics, then by all means, you go over there and you tell them to stop. Just like with all these women protesting, the gays for Palestine, they would chuck you off a fucking building and murder your entire family if they found that shit out. And why is it that every Muslim friend that I have had have left places like Iran because they say Muslims and Islam sucks. They do not like it. They run from it. I posted a thing on Instagram of Afghanistan, places like that back in the 70s. Women could dress however they wanted. Look at them now. They're oppressed, misogynistic. But no, leftists won't take that position because if they do, they're forced to concede that they might in and of itself be kind of Islamophobic, and justifiably so. So every single person out there that wants to sit there and start pearl clutching, oh, you want dead babies. No, I want dead terrorists. And if they put babies in their way, well, then they're going to die too. That's just the way it works. Give me a pragmatic scenario to go the opposite direction because you can't. Every single one of you pacifist little fucking cowards can never give me a pragmatic solution to this. Instead, it's just like, well, murder Jews, that sucks, but it's okay. But if they do it against the Muslims, then oh, how dare you? Fuck those little cowards. They annoy me.
So, John, I wish you'd tell us how you feel and instead of hiding behind Weasel.
I don't hide. Yeah, I know. I'm not going to sit there. I'm fucking General Patton reincarnated, bro. I was like, I believe in peace as much as we can. War, and that's why I say war should be the last option on the table. Diplomacy at all costs. But once diplomacy fails, game the on. Now you're my enemy. Now you're going to die.
So here's the thing, right? What you just said there kind of kind of disputes what I was about to say, but I don't give a shit. I think it makes my point even better, what I was about to say. Let me ask you this, to that person that's saying John wants the murder of Palestinian babies and things like this. John also has vehemently said that the United States should not get involved. We should not be sending troops. We should not be sending money. So the question I have is, this happens so many times when I'm talking to people that usually identify on the left, though not necessarily. They'll say that I say something that upsets them. Let me give you an example. There is a left-wing streamer named Destiny, right? He's kind of a popular left-wing streamer. At one point, I haven't... And I'll talk shit in him all day. I don't care. So Destiny.
I love your two's riff. Like I love how you two just go at each other.
So I actually don't mind Destiny as a person. I enjoy debating him. But one time we had this big conversation on trans issues. And my feeling on trans is this is a complete oversimplification, but it is basically that they have a mental or physical illness. I don't treat people terribly because of their illnesses, but I also don't believe in their delusions. Similarly, if a schizophrenic tells me that ghosts are talking to them, I'm not going to not be friends with a schizophrenic because of that, but I also don't believe the ghosts are real, right? That's how I feel about the trans issue. If you're a polite trans person who's fun to hang around, great. I don't give a shit. Just like if you're a vegan, you can be a vegan all day as long as you aren't trying to make me embrace your style. You know, I can't eat meat and you're not criticizing me. I don't give a shit. So anyways, I'm arguing with Destiny this point, and Destiny, you know, if you're a trans person, he's on the left, so you're probably sticking up for Destiny. And what he says in the middle of this conversation is he says, that's why I consider myself non-binary, because it gives me armor to argue against trans people. Now, if I was a trans person, I might say, I don't like Rob's position. I think that it's offensive to me. But definitely what Destiny's doing is worse. Because Destiny's paying lip service to them. But then he's saying, but I'm using them for my personal advantage. So I really don't give a shit. Similarly, if I'm a person that believes like, well, I think what Israel's doing is terrible to Palestine, and I hear John Burk or I hear robnoerr or anyone else say, we think Israel's more in the right than Hamas, and we think they have the right to defend themselves. However, we do not think the United States should be sending money. We do not think the United States should be involved. Even if I was upset and offended by that statement, I would be more offended by a Biden administration that says, we're going to send $14 billion to Israel, we're going to send troops, or we're going to send weapons, etc., but oh, we really care about Gazan babies. We really care, trust us. We're really against Islamophobia. Because the pandering is worse. And so for me, I don't understand how, and I've heard that, look, I have a more nuanced take than John, I think, on this, right? I do think that you could go too far, though I think John is absolutely correct that the people that are criticizing Israel, most of them are basically like, fuck it, Hamas should just be allowed to kill Israelis every single day, and because they're embedded within civilians, there should be no repercussions to them. That's nonsensical. However, I do think that Israel could go too far and could be condemned if I feel they're going too far. Nonetheless, directionally, it is irrelevant. If you are a person that says, I favor Palestine, or you're a person that says, I favor Israel, but your policy prescription in the United States is, we shouldn't get involved, then I'm with you. To me, that is the most important thing. This is a blood feud between Israel and Palestine that goes back through the beginnings of sort of the major Abrahamic religions. There is no easy solution to these two groups of people feuding. I have my opinions on which groups have enacted more heinous positions. We shouldn't be involved. And so if you're sitting there and you're like, I'm really upset that John Burk, I think he's callous. Yeah, John Burk is callous. And by the way, like, you know, the way I would put it is this. Did you ever watch A Few Good Men? Like, what no one wants to admit is that Nicholson was right. You do.
He was the good guy. Thank you. Oh my God. I am 100% callous. Yep. I fought these people for 4.5 years, but I can also concede to the fact it was an unjust war. America should never have been in the Middle East. That whole thing, we could have basically facilitated a different way forward that didn't involve murdering innocent Iraqi civilians. I know this is going to blow their minds that I have that kind of a take, but my position is as follows. Yes, it has to be cows. Let's take, for example, let's boil this down to a single scenario. You've got Hamas using a child as a human shield. That Hamas member has just murdered your entire family. Now you're put in this position of, well, the source of the murder comes from that individual, because once his and I altercation is done and I let him go because he's using a human shield, he will murder again. He will murder again. You see, in their minds, the people that criticize my stance, you think there is going to be a perfect outcome. That's off the table. There is no perfect outcome. You have to choose the lesser of two evils. So that's why when these types of callous little spineless fucktards accuse me and my ilk of being evil, you're 100% correct. You do have to, in a sense, become evil to eliminate evil. You have to make evil choices to appease, and not appease, really, to support the greater good. So if that Hamas terror, do you really think that if Hamas did not, let's just say that Hamas is given the opportunity to leave Gaza, reestablish itself somewhere else, do you think they would still not take up arms to murder Jewish people? Are you really that naive? Because people that say the opposite of that, you've never been around these people. You've never been around their cultures or their country. And somebody had quoted me and they said, well, you were there illegally. You know what? We were 100%. That war was not justified. But 2 points can be mutually true at the same time. We should have been there, but their culture sucks ass. It's rooted in Islamic ideologies that are there inherently evil. You cannot deny this. And people that do have never actually stepped foot in those countries. I've spent a good chunk of my life over there. I've talked to these people. I trained them. They do not like you. Not all of them, but the militant ones do. So the other part of it is that I want to dissect this is when you've got Hamas embedding itself in Palestine, taking over their government, and by the way, a poll as recently as like 2021, 2022 said that like over 60% actually support Hamas's ability to run the country. Well, that's the majority. Now, it sucks that you cannot leave because for whatever reason, financial, whatever the case may be, women can. They're subjected to that culture. They have to stay there. Well, then that's the way the cards fall. What other alternative do you have? Again, nobody gives me a pragmatic solution to go in there. Say, for example, those hostages they have. Why is nobody screaming for a ceasefire if Hamas releases the hostages? No one's saying that. No one in the political sphere is really pushing that. So Hamas won't do it. So they're going to continue using this propaganda. Isn't it always how you see the greatest actors of all time? I mean, the propaganda is everywhere. You see, oh, they murdered the innocents in the hospital. Oh, that was propaganda. They lied about that. I've seen this shit firsthand. They are wonderful at this. They are crafty. They are snakes. This is what they do. So again, give me the perfect outcome that does not have an evil solution to the choice that is perpetuated by an evil person. It's impossible. It doesn't exist.
Well, and I agree with you. Now, I will push back a little and say that doesn't mean that there can't be overkill on the other side. For example, if it's...
Oh, absolutely, yes. Right. I mean, if Israel's going in there and indiscriminately targeting, which they're not doing, now you are going to have collateral damage. Don't get me wrong, and it sucks. It should be avoided at all costs. I am not condoning Israel going in there and murking babies for the sake of murking babies. Absolutely not. You go in there and you do what you can do. But if the situation arises, they're using human shields, I'm sorry. That's what has to happen.
Right, and I'll leave you go here real quick. I'll just say, I think one thing that's true is that all sides in any of these conflicts have an incentive to propagandize you. And don't for a second think that the U.S. government is less willing or less effective in their propaganda than those that we would consider our enemies. That's not true. And this is easy to understand for many people on the right when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, right? You'll see a video that's like, look at this. Here is, Russians doing an evil thing to a Ukrainian. And then you look into it and you're like, wait a minute, that's footage from like 2013 in Syria. What are you talking about? The same's true of this conflict. When you see a specific story, whether it be 40 Israeli babies' heads being chopped up, probably a lie, or you see that Israel specifically kidnapping these Palestinians and harming their children, that's probably a lie. But directionally, we can see that what Hamas did was a terrorist attack, and I truly believe that they intentionally targeted civilians on the ground with guns, and they certainly took hostages. And there are people that are making excuses for that. I think that my personal opinion is I believe, even though it's difficult to understand exactly what the situation on the ground is, I do believe Israel has gone too far in the targeting of population centers when I think they would be better served. For example, we know leaders of Hamas are in places like Qatar to be doing either targeted attacks on those leaders or calling for public demands for those leaders to be turned over and things like that. Because the real truth is the leaders of Hamas, I think we talked about this a little the other day, they don't care. They want the people in Palestine to be martyred. That's what they want. That's what gets them their PR victory. That's what the people of Palestine, through either no fault of their own or just sheer religious zealotry, don't get. The leaders that are representing them in Hamas are terrorists that want them to die because their deaths further entrench the goals of the people that are leading that movement so that they could go around the world saying, look how evil Israel is. That doesn't mean that Israel can't do horrible things and that they can't have a point, but that's the intent. That's why Hamas is the real evil here. It starts with them because they are intentionally sacrificing their people. But I still criticize how far Israel's gone. However, to me, as an American, two things are also true. One, any American, even if they disagree with me on that has the fundamental position, it's not our business, has the most important argument. I'm not going to sit here and argue with John on the very specifics of was Israel justified to take this action or this action, when on the most important part, we absolutely agree. It's not our business. Stay out of it. Every time the United States gets involved, it is sacrificing middle America, both our wealth and our young people that end up getting sent over there. And we end up making the situation worse and exacerbating it. Then we're told we have to stay there for years and years and years. And oh, by the way, 20 years later, we'll be told we have to go back because the weapons that we sent are now in the hands of terrorists. It's what happened in Afghanistan. It's what's going to happen in Syria. It's what happened in Libya. It's what happens in Iraq over and over and over. However, the other thing I'll say is, John is absolutely right. Think of it this way, and this is going to make me sound like the most anti-intellectual person in the world. As an objective person who's not involved, who has no skin in the game, I don't have family in Palestine, I don't have family in Israel. I can sit there and make moral proclamations and say what Hamas did was terrible, but I think Israel went too far. I get that, and I can say objectively that's true not only morally, but also for the utility of the world. Because if this keeps escalating, it could bring more countries in, etc., etc., etc. But if it was my family kidnapped, you're fucking right, I'm going guns a-blazing. You're absolutely right. And that's true of both sides. That's true if you're someone who's Jewish and Israeli and it's your sister that's a hostage, or it's your mother that's a hostage. That's also true if you're a Palestinian and you see that a population center got bombed and your nephew got killed or your mother got killed. I understand an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, but we are not being honest if we don't say if it was your family, what would you do that the stakes would be different? And it's not my fault that Hamas, a terrorist organization, cannot stand up to Israel when it comes to a military conflict. You can't ask the bigger, well, you can, but you understand why the bigger, stronger people that are being attacked, in this case Israel, are like, fuck you. We're going to use overwhelming force to make sure this shit doesn't happen again. And John's absolutely right. There is a massive movement of people that are pretending. Now listen, I'm sitting here telling you I think Israel's going too far in many ways. But again, I think the role of the what are we going to do? They have to sort it out for themselves. We shouldn't be sending money. That's the best I could offer. We shouldn't be sending troops, But what I do understand is Israel's position is, you fucked with us. You're not a traditional military. You're not like Russia that will bomb us and then we'll bomb the military of Russia. You literally specifically targeted civilians and took them hostage. And so what you're a group of people that believe in martyrdom. So we're going to take an action that is so fucking grotesque that it'll make you think twice for ever doing it again. And I could disagree with it, and all the people in the chat and the spaces could disagree with it and say, but what about the innocent civilians that are being killed and blah, blah, blah. All I'm saying is, if it was your family, if it was your kid that was brutally murdered, if it was your mother that was taken hostage, maybe you would see things differently.
100%. We have Jay at his hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hey, John, I appreciate where you're coming from. Two things. I know you said you've served. Appreciate you. I wanted to see if you could just explain it to the kind of the masses that don't necessarily know, but like how in their own right, Israel is taking every attempt to comply with like
Is somebody speaking
what we would
right
call
now?
low act. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Jay's currently speaking. I'm not sure if you guys can hear him or not.
I can. You're good. Yep.
Yeah, his question was, explaining all the precautions Israel's taking in the war over there. It's multifaceted. I mean, they're doing the knocks, the soft knocks, hard knock. They're doing everything they can, and I think they're doing this with pressure from the international community, which is justified. I mean, I agree with this because they're trying to target strategic Hamas structures. But then how do you do that when Hamas literally puts their base of operations under a hospital? They do this intentionally. It's clear in their actions. Forget the words. Look at the actions here. This is what Hamas has done. This is what they repeatedly do and will always continue to do. They use civilians to shield themselves because they're cowards. So, when people don't get that, it's kind of like I like how Rob talked about, if it was your family. Empathy is one of those biggest things the left likes to harp on. We have to be empathetic to everything, or at least sympathetic at best. It's like we have to be sympathetic, sympathize to this cause. Well, why is it the sympathy is going towards the innocent Palestinians, yet you seem to have forgotten all the Jews that have been murdered? I'm looking at a story right now that a Hamas terrorist was captured and said, we shot crying children until we didn't hear noise anymore. So you tell me, and that's why I like Rob's approach. It's the Blitzkrieg method for me. It's like the sleeping dragon, leave it alone. Just don't fuck with it. There's a reason you don't fuck with it. It stays in its cave. It does its own thing. It tends to its own business. But if you mess with it, it will destroy you. That is the position that America should take. But instead, we have weak leadership. I mean, look at the criminal system in America right now. You have such weak DAs in these blue cities because of like these racial prejudice or the supposed discrimination. I talked about on the show yesterday. The mayor of Chicago said that we need to give out fewer parking tickets to black people because of the racial disparities. Last I checked, your predecessor was Lori Lightfoot, Beetlejuice extraordinaire, another black mayor that essentially went weak on crime. And what happened? Suddenly crime starts rising because your position is you don't want to go hard on criminals. Instead, you want to go soft, whether it be the racial excuse, you can use it for a religion excuse over in the Middle East. But the fact still remains, when you go easy on criminals, when you go easy on evil, it spreads. So when you have cancer, you don't go easy on it. You cut it out. You radiate it. You do everything you can to get rid of it. So again, as long as Gaza exists and Palestine occupies it, the attacks on Israel will not stop. Hamas has literally said this. And there's also a reason why Egypt does not want them. Jordan does not want them. All these places do not want them. Why is that? So please spare me with these empathetic viewpoints of, oh, what about the dead baby? No. It goes way deeper than that. You're using that to just run cover and run interference on your bullshit principles that you just don't get how this whole thing works, because it's just too easy to pearl clutch and take the moral high ground and say, well, I just don't want dead babies. None of us do. But that's not the main point we're discussing here. And they know that. Bar, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it's not the main point.
We'll come back to TJ. Barn had his hand up. Go ahead, Barn.
Yeah, there's basically three ways that different people approach a problem, and nobody wants anybody to be hurt. That doesn't. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
He's speaking, John. I can hear him.
Oh, sorry. I'll go ahead unless John wants me to drop. So there are three different priorities. None of them are wrong, but you have to choose one priority that's your first one. You're either tackling the problem, you're trying to protect the people, or you're dealing with the past. So if I talk to somebody and the first thing they say is, well, in the past, the history, this or that, that's where they're coming from. That's their first priority. If people talk about the children being hurt or people suffering or the hostages taken, that's people. My approach, and I think the approach that you have to take as the first priority, is dealing with the problem. And the problem right now is whatever the past was and whatever the risk are of civilian casualties, there is a problem here. The problem is that war could erupt across that little bitty tiny border at any time, and 1,000 people could be killed in a day. We've seen that not only that just happened recently, but has been promised by Hamas's leaders will happen again. So I had a person say, well, it's like a hostage. You know, if the police are surrounding someone, they have your loved one, they're holding them hostage, would you just shoot anyway, despite the person being threatened, the person you love being threatened? And I thought that was a false analogy, because you're asking the IDF, you're asking the Israeli soldiers to go into an area that's fortified, that's hardened, that's an urban jungle, and you're asking them to risk their own lives in the extraction, instead of softening the target and bombing. So I think Israel's taken the correct approach. They're softening the target, they're doing aerial bombing, sea bombing, and now they're going in slowly, like John was saying, doing hard and soft knocks, taking their time. But in the end, they are focused, they care about the people, and they understand the past, they're part of that flow of time, but they are there to stop a problem. And this time next year, Hamas will not exist. They will have been removed, their military capability will be extinguished. So that's what's going to happen. We're going to stay focused on solving this issue.
I wish I could agree with that. Unfortunately, I see that we're going to continue sending them foreign aid, money. Other countries are getting involved. Now Yemen's declared war on Israel. I don't think this goes away, because Israel can do everything they can to go in there and rid themselves of Hamas. But it's just like ISIS that, this is something civilians need to be aware of. They don't understand this point through no fault of their own. We saw it with Trump. We saw it with Bush. Remember when Bush declared victory in Iraq on that USS carrier that was out in the sea? And said, we've officially declared victory in Iraq. Yeah, that was back in 2005, 2006. Because people at the time just didn't understand. When you want to go after leaders of Hamas, say you talk about like they were in Qatar or whatever. Okay. I've said this multiple times. You cut the head off the Hydra, 2 or 3 grow back. That's what happens with these people. They have chains of command. This is not. People think terrorist organizations are a bunch of dudes with towels on their head and machine guns just doing what they want. No, there are structures. They have a military operational environment they work within. So when you kill a leader, that doesn't change anything. That's what people just don't get. So we can target, I mean, it hurts them, don't get me wrong. It's definitely a morale kill, but at root, this does not stop them. This does not end them. And also, if people actually realize this, when you kill a leader, many of these leaders keep these factions united. Sometimes when you kill a leader, factions are going to break off and become inherently way more violent than before. That's the problem. So it's kind of like when you kill terrorists, you're creating more terrorists. It doesn't matter in which capacity you do it. You will create more terrorists. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And then I like the point the other gentleman said when you talk about like an IDF soldier that Hamas has taken as a human shield. That human shield is a Palestinian. Chances are that Palestinian does not like the IDF to begin with. So now the IDF is basically forced in this position of, okay, do I kill this innocent person that probably in the long run isn't going to like me anyway? That's the complexity of this whole thing. And people just don't get that.
John, this isn't a new problem. This is the Greek legend of the Hydra, right? I mean, this has been around for ages. You snuck in there a good point about funding. And my question to you is this. I believe America does need to fund Israel. I also believe that America has a role in supporting the world in Ukraine. The question to me is, DeSantis said this, I'm a DeSantis supporter. He said it has to be based on American interest. Is America stronger or is America weaker if Israel exists or not? If Israel is just another Arab Muslim territory, if Ukraine is just another part of Mother Russia, does that change America's interest? I personally think it does, and I personally think it's worth the investment.
Rob, I'm going to let you take that one.
Yeah, I completely disagree. So let's say that theoretically that was true. Let's say that we're in, post-World War II, and we could see that there is an importance for a unipolarity in the world. The United States should be sort of the world police. We have this moral mandate to make sure that post-World War II, that we're the strongest military. We were a country that wasn't directly, our landmass, other than Pearl Harbor, wasn't directly affected by the war. So a lot of traditional world powers are in a weakened state, and so we should be going out there achieving justice to do this. Let's say that hypothetically that would be the best world. The problem is the United States no longer has the capacity, the intelligence at the top level, not the soldiers, not the people that are actually volunteering to serve, but their leaders, the generals, etc. And they don't have the moral turpitude to justify that sort of action anymore. They lied to us about Libya. They lied to us about Iraq. They lied to us about Vietnam. They lied to us about Syria. They lied to us about Afghanistan. They lied to us about Yemen. How many times are we going to allow the same lie? Forget about all those lies we just told over and over. This time, you have to support us when we say it's important to arm Ukraine.
Rob, statistically, the odds are that they will be telling the truth at least once, though.
Right. So, for example, I think that Time Magazine is a rag, but the same Time Magazine that 18 months ago tried to browbeat Americans and how important it was, even when they were suffering, because our government, whether you blame Trump, whether you blame Democrats, whether you blame Republicans, regardless, our government locked down huge portions of this country, which ended up leaving to average people in this country suffering greatly emotionally, suffering greatly physically, suffering greatly economically. And Time Magazine was saying, none of that matters. You need to sacrifice more. We need to send more to Ukraine. We need to increase this conflict against Russia. We have to do it. After all, we just lied to you for 4 years about Russia, and how Trump was a stooge of the Russians. We set it up by lying about that, how they're this great evil. But now, forget about all that. Now we have to continue to make sacrifices. Not us at Time Magazine. Not us, the wealthy people that won't be affected and don't care if gas prices go up another $2, $3. We won't have to sacrifice. But you, the average American, you'll have to sacrifice more to go over and do this. Now, 18 months later, Time Magazine, you know what their article was saying yesterday? Oh, there's no real path for victory for Zelensky. And the money that's being sent over is being used for corruption. And a bunch of oligarchs in Ukraine are using this money in corruption. And we've heard stories about a lot of the weapons we sent have disappeared. And 10 years from now, we'll be told, hey, remember the Azov Battalion and the Tornado Battalion that is made up of actual Nazis that we were told were heroes and that we had to support them and that you were a Nazi if you didn't support them? Well, it turns out some bad dudes in there got some of those weapons and now they're terrorists. So guess what? The United States needs to go over there and deal with it, just like we did with the Mujahideen. I'm sorry, enough is enough. The United States has so many problems back home. I'm tired of enriching politicians in the military-industrial complex to send billions and billions of dollars overseas, and sometimes to sending the good people of this country overseas to die, Not wealthy kids' children, but no, the children of the poor and the working class to go over there and die. I'm sorry of doing that because supposedly we have some moral righteousness that we have to be the world police. So no, the United States should not be funding Ukraine. No, the United States should not be funding Israel. And I don't give a damn if you're like, well, I'm more on Ukraine's side or I'm more on Russia's side. And I don't give a damn if you're more on Israel's side or more on Palestine's side. If your opinion is, despite that, the United States shouldn't be involved, then I'm on your side on that issue.
Okay, let me give you a comparison then. The Mujahideen, I think, was a great move because it got rid of Russia from Afghanistan. But what would you do about North Korea and South Korea? Would you remove American troops from the DMZ zone? Would you remove us from that line where death is so close?
It's a different conversation, right? Because what happened is, because of the prior thing that we've done, we're not actively attacking North Korea. I would be against a preemptive active attack on North Korea. Because we have had political situations where we have gone to like our now ally like Japan post-World War II and said, listen, you have to demilitarize, but what we'll do instead is make sure that we maintain a presence here to make sure that a country like North Korea is unable to attack you. So we sort of have an obligation that's been set up for over 50 years. And again, it's different than like actively invading Iraq or actively sending money to prosecute a war from Israel to Palestine or actively giving money to prosecute a war from Ukraine to Russia, right? Those are a different sort of conversation that's happening, right? But we do have military bases all around the country that I think aren't like that in the DMZ, which are, you know, places that we probably have no business in being, and it's just a money suck. We have troops all around the world, right? But we can't defend our southern border. I'm more interested in both our military and our government looking out for the interest of the people in our country than I am for them solving injustices around the world. But let me ask you this. If you think that we have a moral duty to arm Israel or to send money to Israel, do we also have a moral duty to the Christian Armenians that Azerbaijan's going to commit genocide against?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm outside now. I've been to Azerbaijan and dealt with the internally displaced people in that conflict. It's we don't have the historic ties that you referred to. We do have a historic tie in Israel, but I didn't talk about the moral valuation. I talked about the valuation of America's interest. And America does have interest in having a secure, free, democratic, entrepreneurial, economic partner in Israel, in that region. And so I think there's advantages to America, regardless of the morality of it. They are our ally, and I think it's worth the investment.
Okay, let's say that hypothetically that's true, right? Which, fine. I'm of the, you know, the Thomas Jefferson quote, free trade with all, alliance with none. Right? That these unnecessary entangling alliances will lead to all sorts of crazy stuff. The same mentality that you're putting forth is a mentality that's used to like justify our continued existence within the military alliance of NATO. So let's say what's likely to happen then. Let's say the United States sends a bunch of money to Israel or gets directly involved. And there are reporting I'm seeing that, you know, there are some form of troops or special ops that are involved in perhaps a training capacity that are on the ground in Israel right now. So let's say that leads to conflict escalating, such as Iran gets directly involved, publicly, as opposed to just Hezbollah behind the scenes. And let's say that leads to other countries like Yemen that are now saying they're going to get involved. One of the countries that has paid lip service that they're going to get involved in is Turkey. Now let's talk about a little history of Turkey. Turkey is our NATO ally, which means we are duty bound by the NATO treaty that if they get involved in a war and they are attacked, then we have to go to war to protect them. So much so that we station nuclear weapons in Turkey. So if we look at a situation like Syria, for example, we're told, well, we need to be in alliances of places like NATO. They're our allies, and it makes sense for the U.S. interest to continue to profit that sort of military alliance. So in Syria, I won't go through the whole spiel, but part of the people in Syria, we're told that we're there to fight ISIS. Some of our allies there are Al-Qaeda. So we're in one country, Afghanistan, we're told we have to have a 20-year war to fight Al-Qaeda, but there are allies in Syria, right? Says Jake Sullivan, who's still a national security advisor. So we're allied with them in Syria, and we're also allied with this group, the Kurds. Now, we're told we could never leave Syria because if we leave Syria, our NATO allies, the Turks, will commit genocide against our ally, the Kurds. Now, Turkey, at the same time, is now saying we are going to get involved against Israel. Against Israel. That means that we're told that it's important to be in a military alliance with Turkey, but it's also important to defend Israel, who may soon be at war with Turkey. So the best thing to do to avoid the escalation is to allow Israel, which massively outpowers Hamas, to go ahead and take care of business as they see fit. Maybe you condemn it. Maybe you think it's not hard enough. Whatever, not our place. Because if we say, no, we have to get involved because we're in an alliance and we think it's strategic for it, well, now we're going to find ourselves in war with a country that's also our ally, supposedly, which we station nuclear weapons in. So what does that world look like where we're now at war with our NATO allies?
Well, I read Turkey's statement, his comments, as more diplomatic power. You know, you can exert diplomatic power just like you can do economic or military. Maybe I had my biased glasses on, but the way I heard it was through sort of a State Department lens. I did not hear actual. I know the crowds were chanting Turkish troops in Gaza, but I didn't get the sense that those words meant that. And I think it's used as leverage within the NATO community for exactly the reason you are talking about, but I don't think that's a real risk. If it did become a risk and I were wrong, that would be a very difficult situation to assess. I've never really understood Syria. That has been the craziest, wildest thing. I feel like I sort of get the Kurdish issue in different places, but you're right. You picked two of the stickiest things, but we are not allied with either of those. We have signed military pacts with Israel, and that makes them different in the region.
I don't want to dominate this conversation. I want other voices to get involved. So I'll just ask you this real quick. Just a couple of quick answers if you can give me. One, if the United States didn't send any money or troops, do you think Israel could beat Hamas?
Yes, absolutely. But I think we need to continue surrounding them with strike groups and shooting weapons down and sort of using the bully pulpit to project our power in the region to keep other players out. But yes, to your
Second, if you think, seeing as how you think the status quo is Israel will win, if there's a chance that the United States getting involved could draw in other powers like Turkey, Yemen, etc., do you think then it would be worth the United States not getting involved?
Man, you just went way beyond what I can even guesstimate. What do you think?
I think absolutely. I think for the moral reasons that I've already outlined, and even the strategic reasons that I've already outlined, that the United States shouldn't be involved. But I think furthermore, if we're just looking at what is best for Israel, if Israel is going to win in the status quo, and it's just a matter, well, the United States could make it slightly easier for them by giving some sort of arms, weapons, troops, etc. But there's a chance that that will escalate, and now instead of Israel just fighting Hamas, Israel's fighting Turkey, Israel's fighting Yemen, and all of these other countries, then I think it would be a huge mistake even if Israel's our ally. Similarly, right, if you truly care about the Ukrainian people, the worst thing you could want is for the United States to continue to fund the Ukrainian people to go to war with Russia as opposed to actually trying to have a peaceful resolution. Because the people that will suffer...
That's DeSantis' position right there, that we should be tying all aid to Ukraine to them honestly participating in peace negotiations.
Well, that could very well be true, which that would be a good resolution, I think, on the part of DeSantis, because we could see that, for example, the German chancellor just came out and said that there were peace negotiations, months ago, and that Zelensky and company were willing to come to the negotiating table with Russia to try to end the conflict, but Blinken and those in the United States government were like, no. Keep going. It is the blood of the young men of Ukraine that will pay the biggest price for the United States continuing to fund that. So just because we're allies with someone, sometimes you have to sit back and say, does the U.S. involvement make this situation better or worse? Who are the people that will profit? Who are the people that will suffer because of this? And I think given the history of the United States and their intervention in these places, and the fact that it always means back home, and make no mistake about it, I don't want to see innocent people killed anywhere around the world, ever. But it is my government's responsibility to look out for the people of this country first and foremost. And there's an awful lot of problems for people in this country right now. And yet it seems like both parties' leadership are more interested in getting involved in things around the world rather than look at the problems that are occurring in this country. And because of that, and because I see the recent history of the United States getting involved in these situations have made things worse almost every single time, I am vehemently against sending more aid and sending things like this that will escalate this situation and make the situation on the ground worse for not only those countries where we'll be sending that aid, but also for the people of this country. John, I don't know if
All right.
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, John.
No, I've been listening. We're going to have to go ahead and end the space, though, because I got to get ready for the show. We're going to be doing this again tomorrow at 10 a.m. CST, same time, same place. Appreciate everybody that participated in this. Rob, as always, a great co-host. And like I said, tomorrow's topic, we just pull a headline. Rob, if you want to pull one for tomorrow, let's put it on. Let's alternate this back and forth. I'll do one, you do one. Does that sound fair?
That sounds absolutely great. We still have Scott Pressler, who I think is amazing. He might be able to do the show at some point. He's incredibly busy, so there's always a chance we'll get a guest, and that could be, sort of focus on the guest will be the topic as opposed to a topic. But yeah, absolutely, we'll try. I'll get a topic sent to you. I just want to thank you again, John, and I want to thank everyone that spoke. Look, even if we have disagreements, I'm a passionate guy. Clearly, John's a passionate guy. It sounded like he was about to break through the computer screen and go after people there. But I think that's wonderful.
It gets me hard.
Yeah, that's the type of people
It's
the type of people I want to listen to. And you have to understand, we want people that disagree with us. We want people that agree with us. It's just how we talk. We have thick skin. And so I appreciate all of you, even that disagree. I really do. I think most of us, particularly on this space, have more agreements than disagreements. So I think it's a worthwhile conversation. Tell your friends. Look for us every day at 10 a.m. Central or 11 a.m. Eastern time, Thursdays and Fridays. So we'll be here every Thursday and Friday. Thank you again, John.
Thank you, guys.
All right, everybody. Take care.
Take care. At 10 a.m. Central or 11. All right, Z. You still there? Yeah, sure. I'll debate Ryan Dawson. You send Ryan Dawson my contact information. I'll be happy to debate Ryan Dawson. I don't know who Ryan Dawson is, but I'll be happy to debate him. Now, let's look at what happened here. And this is why I bet, regardless of what Z thinks, regardless of who he votes for and what his political position is, how he is adapting the mannerisms and the tactics of the ridiculous left that I criticize all the time. My take on it is, I don't think the United States should be involved. In fact, I actually think Israel is going too far. As I've said, not only when I was there talking with John, but I've said on my channel, as I've tweeted out, I've talked about the ability that, although I think we have to be honest, that Israel, because they've been attacked in such a way, they're going to the idea of proportional response is ludicrous. They could still go too far, and oftentimes I think it's worth criticizing it. I've talked about the fact how I see people that are pro-Israel, that are bloodthirsty, that are cheering on the death of innocents in Palestine. I've talked about the fact that I think that just like I shouldn't be judged because my government has done heinous things, I wouldn't want China to then bomb me and my family and say, well, you had it coming because of your government. Similarly, I don't feel like that about people in Palestine. So I have a slightly nuanced position of this, but my most forthright position is the United States should not be involved, that it's terrible for the United States to be involved. Similar to that, Z will say, you're a Zionist shill. You're a Zionist shill. I've talked for years. I defended people like Ilhan Omar, who criticized AIPAC and was told that she was anti-Semitic. I said that's nonsensical. It is absolutely not an anti-Semitic position to criticize the undue influence that the nation of Israel through their lobbying has on the United States. I've talked about when I thought that Israel led us into quagmires in the Middle East that we shouldn't be involved in. I've talked about crimes that have occurred with Israel in the past. I've talked about the idea that we should be in some sort of alliance with people that are involved in these old conflicts to be nonsensical, and it's going to lead to conflicts escalating, not just harming the United States, but also harming people on the ground in Israel, Palestine, and these other places. None of that is good enough for people like Z. None of that is good enough for the virtue signaling sacks of shit like him. None of it's good enough. You're a Zionist. You're an absolute Zionist. If you don't stand up and fucking praise Hamas and say murder Israeli babies, then you're a Zionist, according to Z. That's where he's at. That's where this fucking piece of shit garbage people like him are at. Fucking virtue signaling worthless sacks of shit. Actual anti-Semites that would cheer the death of fucking any group that they consider some form of oppressor. That's where they are. That's this fucking piece of shit. I can talk until I'm blue in the face. It is wrong for the United States to do this. It is wrong for Israel to bomb these places. It is wrong for people to be cheering for the death of Israeli babies. And this fucking sack of shit will say, you're a Zionist. You're a Zionist. That's what you are. Then other people on here will say, well, it's not really, it's not. When I say, okay, if that's what you're going to call me a Zionist, then I'll call you a Hamas supporter. You see how far we're getting here by doing this? You see how it's not productive? You see how it's just virtue signaling bullshit? Then we got another person who'll go, hey, it's not productive to call people Hamas sympathizers. No fucking shit. No shit. That's my entire point. Scream for you, Piggy. Do you see? Do you see the lefties? Do you see? Debate Ryan Dawson, debate. Squeal Piggy. Well, how do you sound? What's your name, Mr. Tough Guy Anonymous Person? Go ahead. Why don't you come on right now and debate me, right? Obviously, I'm just a Zionist shield. It'll be easy to dispense with me with thoughts and logic, right? I'm just squealing like a piggy. Clearly you, Mr. Anonymous, who we can't hear what your voice sounds like. Clearly you, who's been on here whining and moaning, oh, you're a Zionist, oh, genocide. Clearly, you're a very intelligent person. How would you like to come on and debate me right now? I'll give you the Discord link. No problem, right? It'll be easy to dispense of my pro-Zionist argument. Right, shithead? Right? You can call in? What do you think the chances are that this tough guy who knows that he can't debate me but will tell me that I should go debate someone else? What do you think the chances are that this piece of shit has the balls to call in? What do you think? Chances are that... Big man? You're the big man. You're the big man saying I'm pro-genocide. You're the big man saying that I'm a Zionist. Call in. Simple enough, right? Simple enough, correct? Calling in, Mr. Big Man Z? After all, you're a big man. You know that I'm a Zionist. Should be easy to prove it. No problem. Right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Fucking loser. Rob squealing. I'm not squealing. I'm excited when I talk to sacks of shit like you that I know are absolute cowards that sit behind anonymous names in their computer screen and act like tough guys and say shit that don't know what the fuck they're talking about. That's what I enjoy. I enjoy sacks of shit like you that think that you're a tough guy and think that you're a keyboard warrior, but you don't even have the fucking balls, not only to say shit face to face in like a public sphere, you don't even have the balls to do it via a phone call. You don't even have the balls to do it via a Discord call. You fucking tough guy. That's what I thought. I'm not so mad. I'm having a great time. I love it. There's nothing better than seeing a would-be tough guy like you get put in your fucking place. I'm a big anonymous tough guy. I'll call you a Zionist, even though everything you're saying is critical of Israel and the United States involvement. I'll still say you're a Zionist. Oh, of course I'm too much of a pussy to call in. So Z, thank you so much for your time. What we don't like is fake tough guys in our channel, so I enjoyed your time here, and thank you for providing the content for me. Now go back to your fucking mom's basement, whatever you do, and be a tough guy keyboard warrior, right? See ya. So no, I'm not a Zionist. I've criticized Israel. I think it's despicable how many people are so, like, I've always hated this mindset. Well, make it a glass parking lot, blah, blah, blah. I've always hated that mindset. I find it to be disgusting. Even if I think that what Hamas did is absolutely more heinous when it comes to what it would take for an individual to pull up a gun and shoot a kid in the face or to take hostage a innocent civilian. I think that's a level of evil more than dropping a bomb on an area that you know there'll be collateral damage that will kill children. I absolutely find the second despicable as well if it was done haphazardly or joyfully, or if there were alternatives that could be done. And I do think that there are alternatives. I think that Israel could, although it would be difficult, could do things like target more of Hamas's leadership rather than general population centers. John Burk may disagree with me on that. That's fine. I'll have that debate with John Burk. But for the purpose of the discussion we were having, I think the most important thing is to say, even if I disagree on that, I will take someone that says, regardless of what my belief on what Israel should do, we shouldn't have a say in it. The United States should not be involved. That should be the message being put forth in this government, in this country right now. I would rather fucking deal with a person that says, look, I think that Hamas is a legitimate government. I don't think that they did all of the heinous things they were accused of. But all I'm saying is, one way or another, the United States shouldn't be involved. Great. That's more important to me. Now, the people that thought that Hamas was beheading children and said, yeah, I celebrate that because colonizers, fuck those people. But to me, the biggest issue is what is your opinion on what the United States should be doing? I don't think they should be involved. Great. Everything else is secondary to me. And for people to come on and virtue signal and say, that makes me a Zionist. I'm a Zionist for that opinion. Fuck you. I have no time of day for you. You're a piece of shit. What's up, Aftershock? Absolute sack of shit. No time of day for it. Especially if you're going to be too cowardly to come on and talk about it. So anyways, now that we got that off our chest, it feels good. Feels good. Feel great talking about that. Get a little pressure relieved. So today I get to hang out with my son. You're a Palestinian that would be up for a Discord call? Sure, if you like. Can we do it in 15 minutes? Can the extent of our call, we could do it now, but the extent of the call be 15 minutes? Because I got to get downstairs to my son here. But absolutely, I'd be down. There's the link to my Discord. And follow the directions there and just hop on the channel. Let's see if we get you on here. I gotta adjust my settings on Discord here. There we go. We good. All right. Yeah. Hop on to the waiting room there in the voice channel, and then we'll bring you on. Thanks, Nico. I appreciate it. I don't know if that Discord link works anymore. God, do I have some bad heartburn right now, too. There we go. All right. We'll assume this is the person. Silb, can you hear me? And are you...
I am.
You're the same person? Okay. Thanks so much for calling in.
How are you?
I'm doing great. So can you tell us just real briefly about your involvement in the area? You've lived in the area, you said?
Yes, I was born in the West Bank, and at early age I moved to more Israeli-controlled areas because my family also had lands there, and we managed to manage an Israeli passport. So I also grew within Israel. I'm currently not there. I return every vacation. I'm out of the country for studies, but I cannot also go back because of the war. The airport is,
Yeah, I obviously, and I hope that, I'll be praying for your family and loved ones in the area. I think that it's easy to think of it as some abstract situation for someone like me that has no connections to the area whatsoever. But really putting a human face on it and understanding, regardless of where your predilections might be for which sides you favor this or that, that ultimately it's innocent people that are caught up into it. And it's truly, truly horrific. And so my prayers are out to you. What in general, do you think that, like we hear from a lot of people on a pro-Palestinian side, that Israel has been the aggressor, has this sort of open air prison, and is sort of intentionally causing like genocide type casualties for the people in Palestine?
First of all, thank you for your remarks. My family is a little bit more in the north, so as long as Lebanon does not get into this too, I think at least my family is safe. At least in the north. In the West Bank, my grandparents and stuff, they are far from the action, but let's hope things do not escalate. Mm-hmm. Regarding this whole thing, me personally living in the West Bank, I have seen what the Israeli army does and how it does behave. People must remember that when we speak about the Israeli army, we are talking about people that hit the age of 18, 19 and get called to military. And I do not want to judge anybody based on age, but I assure you that at the age of 18 or 19 myself, I was not the wisest person on earth. And if you have handed me a gun and thrown me in an area such as the West Bank, patrolling areas, I mean, they do dumb shit.
Right.
Let's start with that. And if you wanted to use expressions that are used against Palestinians, I could actually use the terms as barbaric and terrorist. But let's keep it clean from both sides. Each side is going to call the other side evil, whatever it is. I don't want to get into the moral conflicts because I think morality has nothing to do with war. War is about power. And that's what we are witnessing. We are witnessing a powerful entity that basically playing their cards very brutal as soon as they got a tip of a sip of what they have forced upon the Palestinians for many years.
Let me ask you this, and we'll definitely get to that. But one question I've always wanted to ask someone: I feel in the United States that I have very little control over the leadership of my country. How much do you think the average person living in Gaza, the average Palestinian, has to do with sort of Hamas in general, which is supposedly the leadership there? I know the last election was decades ago that elected Hamas, but does the average Palestinian living their day-to-day life, like, are they out there like cheering on Hamas and saying, yeah, they're the best, or are they just sort of living their life and like, whatever, they're the leaders, we don't really care about it?
Okay, my answer to you would not be based on exact data. The only time I was in Gaza, it was in Bet Hanun when I was 5 years old, and I was with my father, so I don't even recall how the place looks like. It's my only time that I was in there.
Okay.
But I would give my answer based upon what I experienced in the West Bank, because I think there is a certain similarity to a certain degree. And I think you as an American would face a big difference between you and your government the same way that I face it as an Arab Israeli within Israel, because the government is so strong and high in a sense. It's very distant from the people, I feel, when the government is strong. But when we are talking about a weaker government, if we want to call Hamas a government, they don't have much resources, but they have the majority of resources. I think it becomes on this level, like it becomes on if Hamas want to buy some metal for their rockets. Well, with which family do we do business? Oh, they have a metal shop. Oh, so you will hear news in the next day, the ladies between each other. My husband did a deal with the big boys. You know, it's basically, it would be like I hate to give this comparison, but it would be Lockheed Martin with the US government, but on a smaller local level. I think they are more connected to their government than an American would be, because I think the people that would be really connected to the American government, the people that have very big companies. Like, I don't know, maybe the guy that works in some huge company that really has the time to sit and speak with the decision makers, that drinks a cup of tea with the previous prime minister or something, you know? Like, those people are more connected. But in Gaza and West Bank, in those smaller areas, I feel they are more connected. I feel there is a lot of marriages. I must remind you that when Israel, for example, says we bombed a headquarters in Gaza, let's be I will be fair. I will try to be fair for both sides. Hamas is not on top. Hamas is not on top of the ground. All of Hamas is underground now, mostly. Like, the best they can do is shoot a hole that Hamas dug to shoot from. Hamas digs another hole 5 meters away, and they shoot again. What they are saying, they are actually shooting businesses for Hamas people. And you must remember, Hamas is amongst the people. So he shoots a business for this Hamas guy over here. He shoots an office over there. The two big Gaza towers that were shot, claiming it's a Hamas headquarters. It was not a Hamas. They were not planning military bases over there. They had a studio that worked for them. So yeah, the Hamas is more intermingled with the nation than many Westerners would think.
Okay, let me ask this. Given that, right, and again, trying to take sort of moral proclamations out of it and understanding that this is a conflict from two sides basically struggling for power, do you believe what we're told is directionally accurate about the Hamas attack on October 7th? Do you believe that I'm not saying they beheaded 40 babies. I don't believe that. But do I think that there were probably babies that were shot point blank, or there were civilians that were shot point blank, or there were hostages taken? Do you believe that that's directionally accurate, that things like that occurred?
Okay, I will. First of all, I know that I'm happy that you don't get into the moral stuff like usually I see on American media, because like what the fuck are we talking about? But just to save the trouble for whoever is in chat and for you to try to analyze what is his moral standing, I will give my moral standing real quick and then go to tell you if exactly what I believe and what I don't believe.
Okay.
My moral standing: Hamas are not angels coming from heaven. Okay, they fuck up as much as anybody else, but I do not really believe that Hamas, all what Hamas wanted is to go and to show this horror show. Like with some of how the compositions that I have seen from Western media, I absolutely looked at Hamas like Mad Max, you know, the movie, the people with the, you know, it looked like fucking Mad Max. That's what I thought. Holy shit. No, I do not believe they. Like, if you really go and dig, you see that Hamas actually attacked multiple watchtowers. They actually, there was within Israel, there was a base of military base or military base that some Israeli soldier called for an airstrike over a base within Israel. Like, they did aim. Like, saying that they only aimed at civilians is bullshit. Like, they really aimed. It was very complex. They could not have only aimed over civilians. They aimed at military structures. Now, on what happened?
But do you think they also? I think that. Listen, let me. And I obviously will give you a chance to finish your point here, but I'll just, from my point of view, I think that anytime there's a conflict like this, you're right that no one's angels, and all sides have an interest in propagandizing to the rest of the world. So when the United States is in Iraq, clearly the United States is going to point things as rosy a picture as possible for the United States, and Iraq's going to do the same. The same, I think, is true of Hamas versus Israel. Both sides are going to bullshit us, and the United States government that has skin in the game, they're going to bullshit us as well. So I find it difficult to take any specifics, and that's not to even mention just general fog of war. Anytime something's happening in real time, even if you're trying your best to be accurate, there's going to be misinformation and things that come out. So it's difficult for me to look at an individual situation and say, is this story about a baby being in an oven true? My gut says no, because it's too on the nose. It's too like, well, that's making the other side seem subhuman to an almost ridiculous point. Now, is it possible that it's true? Have heinous things like that occurred on both sides? Yeah. Do I think that probably it happens more on the Hamas side than Israel, as far as what we would consider here in the West like more of a barbarism? Probably, but then you can also say maybe when it comes to the actual numbers of people, like indiscriminately dropping a bomb probably harmed more, you know, Palestinian children than what Hamas harmed Israeli children. So it's a difficult question, and there is nuance involved with it. I get this. But directionally, I think that although you're probably right, that Hamas obviously would rather target strategic military or government installations and things like that. I think that it's probably, at this point, incredibly likely, seeing as the GoPro footage and things like we've seen from people that are allegedly, in Hamas themselves, that they took hostages, that they went into villages, and despite the fact that they may have been targeting predominantly military installations, they certainly did seem to appear to target civilians and take hostages and things like that. Do you think that's true?
I think this base that you have built is very clean. That I actually, as a person that stands from a moral perspective, where he sees Hamas, regardless of their sins, as a resistance fighter, the same way that you see the American military, maybe not you, but a general American citizen would see that the American military is a net worth positive morally, although some fucked up shit that happens here and there that we, as you said, for sure the American military did some fucked up shit. Like, even I, as a person that stands from the other moral spectrum, I can actually agree on this base that you built. But with the following notification, I want to notify you to a couple things. The people that went into those places were not only Hamas. There were also civilians filled with hate, civilians that some of them have no life. Second of all, did some Hamas workers do bad shit? I assure you fucking some did. I assure some fucking did. Like, I cannot imagine if American soldier goes to an Iraq and some of them, there is some fucked up people, you can tell that. And he decides to abuse his power. Fucking a soldier, even a fucking policeman decides to abuse his power when he gets a chance of power. I would imagine, yes, some Hamas workers did abuse their power, but I would see it as unfair to immediately jump from one case or two cases or even 7 cases to declare all of Hamas that this is their pure intention. That I see unfair, because we do not do the same thing for the American military. When we see somebody in Iraq fucking up a little kid or something, or shooting at something that we have proof of from the WikiLeaks thingies or stuff like that, we do not go generalize all the American people that serve in the American military are barbaric monsters. Blah, 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 blah. We do not do that. So why do we do it with Hamas?
Well, if I could retort, I think I see two differences, right? The first is, well, three things, right? The first, which is a very minor point, is some people do. I've heavily criticized the immorality of the United States invading places like Iraq, or sort of them working with the UN and NATO in Libya, which I thought that they were committing heinous crimes there. But you're right. You're obviously directionally right that it doesn't occur to the level that is occurring with Hamas. But I think that there's two reasons as such. One, when that happens, even if it's just virtue signaling in the United States, the leaders of the United States at least pay lip service to condemning that. And so many times there are trials, for example. I've seen heinous footage of U.S. soldiers doing heinous things in Afghanistan, and we have cases where there were actually people that we saw video that there were trials and they were court-martialed and they were jailed, etc., etc. I haven't seen the condemnations from Hamas leadership saying, like, yes, there were obviously people that did heinous things. The other thing is, if we are to believe, and I see no reason, unless you could give me some reason that I'm unaware of, it seems as if Hamas took hostages. And that's like, if they are truly contrite for that, they would say, well, we're freeing the hostages. Like some knuckleheads did some really bad stuff. They took these people, but now we're telling them that was wrong and we're sending them back. Or admitting, like, look, they took the hostages and they killed them. But that's not what we as Hamas stand for. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe here in the West, we don't get that. But I haven't seen those condemnations, and I haven't seen the claims from Hamas that we didn't take hostages, and if we did, we're giving them back. So I think because of that, the perception that would be given that's different than like, well, we don't demonize the entire U.S. military if a few bad apples do something. Well, that's because the United States military arguably isn't then condemning them while at the same time holding hostages or refusing to condemn those actions. Does that make sense?
Yes, but something related to this. Your English is much better than mine, and sure. you put so many points, and I try to remember all of them, so I might forget some points.
No problem. I should work on that. I'm sorry. So
it's my okay. So I want to So I will try to address everything I remember, but I want to add some inputs too. So maybe you guys are not aware of, or maybe not very discovered too. Me personally, from heinous, let's forget about the bombings. I love that you brought the bombings as an example, because if you want to speak about data, kill ratio between soldiers to civilians, Hamas has the upper hand. Hamas, the ratio of how many army personnel, admitting by the Israeli spokesman that he declared a couple days ago, that's only what he declared, we don't know what they are hiding, that they got 325 specifically soldiers. So, soldier to civilian ratio of deaths by Hamas is much better than the Israeli one, I must admit. Like, even if I was an alien to this problem. So data-wise, I could say soldier to civilian casualties, Hamas does a better job than Israel. Let's start with that. Yes, of course, it's because of the bombings. I understand that, but I'm giving a general statement. Regarding person to person, it's not things that I even view on YouTube. There's many videos that I used to view back in the 2012s and 13s about the Palestinian case that I cannot even find on YouTube, which is strange in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But I lived in the West Bank, and I have seen the brutality that Israeli soldiers treat Muslims. I have seen at least twice in my life an Israeli soldier shooting a man from zero distance. A man that has nothing. In the West Bank, we don't have Hamas. Yes, they would tell you, oh, no, there is Hamas families even in Jordan, somebody that is from a guy that works in Hamas. But there is no control. They don't have control in the West Bank. And I have seen this multiple times. I have seen similar level of brutalities, a lot more throughout those years from the Israeli side with my own eyes, let alone what you could yourself search and see what Israeli soldiers and Israeli settlers, which are people that get weapons. Even the Israeli prime minister, not the prime minister, one of the government parties goes and gives them weapons for free and basically gives them weapons, and the Israeli army is not allowed to touch them by law because they are Israeli citizens, so the army cannot touch them. And in the areas where they live at, there is less police presence and more Israeli presence. So you are left with Israeli citizens that are allowed to play around with Palestinian citizens. And then then it's what gets covered on Fox News when one motherfucking Palestinian gets crazy after he loses his house for the second time from a settler, and probably had his auntie killed by a settler, and has his son with an injury. For example, my auntie, her left ear, she cannot hear with her left ear. Why? Because when we were in the West Bank, Israeli dudes were for fun, throw a sound grenade into the house, for fun, throw a sound grenade into the house. They did not do harm, you understand? But we are the lucky guys. We got the sound grenade.
Right.
I cannot imagine what others got, because if you resist even a little bit, if you even try, hey, why the fuck do you throw a sound grenade in your house? Do you know what you are then? You are a terrorist that resisted.
I agree. That's
That's
how it would be painted. Absolutely.
Yeah. So yes, regarding now, you said about Hamas leaders not, talking about it. I would give two perspectives from our perspective. First of all, they are the underdogs.
Sure.
So other than that, they are getting fucked hard. Now you want them to also be like the Americans or the Israelis that have the upper hand, that have the luxury to start apologizing about mistakes here and there. Like already, almost all of the political narrative is against them. Them coming up now, Ismail Haniyeh coming up. You know what? The Israelis were right. We had a motherfucker that fucking put a baby in the oven. I do not believe, like, that sounds like something that my grandma tells me about the wife of my uncle because she hates her. That's some fucking bullshit, right? Yeah, we had one guy that put a baby in the oven. How does that make his stand? Like, he already weak politically. Yes, we probably have more. You know what? Based on statistics, there should be more psychos in Gaza than there is in America or Israel, just based on the condition.
Mm-hmm. Now,
But
if I could just ask you real quick to comment, do you believe that there are hostages though? Because I think that you're right. I shouldn't. You're right. I shouldn't.
No, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I do believe that there is hostages, and I do believe that Hamas aimed for taking hostages. I do not believe they aimed to kill, because it does not make sense to kill innocent civilians that did not fight them. I do not think that that was their core purpose. Taking hostages, yes. But for that, I would stand and say, fucking Palestinian hostages, and they call them hostages, from the West Bank and from Gaza are filled in the Israeli prisons without any judicial due. Basically, the person that I told you, for example, if somebody speaks up against an Israeli soldier that's doing what the fuck he wants in the middle of West Bank, his best scenario is becoming a prisoner. Mm-hmm. So yes, there is hostages, and I think it was just a strategic move.
Okay.
That's the thing. Is it morally okay? But the whole scenario is not morally okay. The whole scenario is fucked up.
Yeah.
Sorry for if I...
Oh, no. I'm very much enjoying. Now, I do have to tell you just that I have to leave in like 5 or 6 minutes. I would be happy to have you come on and talk more about this, because I think it's very interesting to hear people. Because again, if I start under the assumption that everyone's going to propagandize me, and that might include you as well, I understand that you have a bias. So I'm not telling the listeners here that you should just take your word for it and that's the end all be all. But I think it's important to hear different perspectives, particularly from people that are more close to the region and know people that have been personally affected. So I really appreciate the conversation. But if I could just say in general to what you spoke about, if we take morality out of it and we just look at it through perspective of one side might be, depending on where you're sitting, one side might be considered more immoral than the other. But really, this is just a power. If we're just looking at it through the system of there's a war and people are achieving power. Given
cycle of fucking war, yeah, putting your finger at one point of that cycle and deciding immorality. Come on, man! Like if you go just a moment ago, you could see immorality. The whole base is immoral. It's like two people that are beating somebody. And then he says fuck by mistake, and he says, oh, excuse me for the language, motherfucker. Like it's already fucked up. Like, don't excuse him for the language. The beating is already happening,
right,
from both sides.
So for example, if you took a fist fight and depending on where you edit it, you could make either side look bad. So you could edit it to the guy punching back, and if that's all you see, you're like, well, that's
which right. I must admit is happening by both parties. This, right. I admit it's happening by the Palestinians and by the Israelis, and it has been happening.
And
This I agree.
I will agree with you on this sense. That's something that I think that I've seen. I agree with you that in the United States and in the Western world, oftentimes what happens is they try to distill things down to good versus evil. One side's good and one side's bad. And oftentimes what that means is it's very difficult to see sort of citizen journalism or video on the ground that provide things from the perspective of the side that we're being told to say is evil. So I think that you're probably right, that there was probably videos that you could find that were sort of
one. I will throw one quote into that. Like when the Prime Minister of Israel comes and said it's the powers of light versus the powers of darkness, motherfucker, and you are saying that Hamas are the ideologically extremists? Okay, ideologically extremist. And what is the power of light versus the power of? Is this Marvel? Yeah, what are we? You know,
it is a religion, you know, and I think on both sides, people feel that it's more than just a conflict, that there are religious motivations behind it. There are people, I don't know if you knew this, but there are people in the United States that are Christians that believe that the book of Revelations will become true when there is this massive conflict in the Middle East. So many of them are seeking that. They're actually seeking for religious reasons to get involved because they think that it'll help a prophecy get fulfilled of their religion. So it becomes very dark and depressing when so many people are looking at this as sort of not just like a practical view of survival and what's happening on the ground, but there are these other high-minded religious motivations. But what I'll say is, so I do have to, I'll have to get going. I'll definitely give you the final word, and hopefully we could talk again soon. But I'll say this, given what we've talked about and what you've said here, right, which is, if we're just looking at it from a power dynamic system, and Hamas is embedded with the people, and they have taken hostages, if I take the morality out of it, and I'm just looking at, like, it's my family versus your family, and you have several members of my family hostage, regardless if it's morally acceptable, which I don't find it morally acceptable for them to have hostage, but that's not important for this conversation. How is then Israel supposed to attack Hamas because they feel that they are continuing to escalate by not releasing these hostages if Hamas is, as you said, embedded in with the people of Palestine? Now, I think that there is a criticism to be made that Israel could still go too far. But if we're taking morality out of it and we're just looking at it for a pure power dynamic, of course Israel is going to respond by attacking civilian centers if the admission is, yeah, Hamas still has these hostages and they're embedded within civilian centers.
Then I would need to get a little bit in the technicality of the current positioning of the units, of the Israeli units, if that's okay, because this is technical, I think.
Okay, maybe so. But yeah, if you would like, we could set up a time. I will be on again at 11 a.m. tomorrow. We'll be doing another Spaces with John Burk, which you're more than welcome to join that space. Or if you'd like, we could talk after that. That usually ends around 12:45 or 1. But I think this is an interesting conversation. And I think that, you know, I do agree with you that.
Look, I would finish my part with this because you asked a very good question. I could now offer my YouTube learned strategic expertise on war, but I would not, and I will jump back to morality and say, well, maybe they should make the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers that have vowed to die in the name of Israel, to actually go inside there and risk a high casualty of soldiers, because that's what soldiers have been trained to do, instead of claiming that they are bombing in the name of whatever they are saying, and they still did not enter Gaza City, so why the fuck did they bomb so much Gaza City? We will see if they will enter it. Go lose soldiers instead of losing a ratio of 1,000 civilians in the name of one Hamas guy. If you actually value the same value on a Palestinian life and an Israeli Jewish life, why are you doing this? Anyway, you are risking your civilians by doing this. So I would answer it from just a moral perspective, not from a technical one. I would say, let the soldiers go in and sacrifice their souls instead of you killing 700 civilians in the name of saving one civilian or two civilians.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I'll talk about it here for a minute, but thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Hopefully I get to talk to you soon. And I think it's important that even if you if you're listening and you disagree and you think that, like, no, Israel's on the side of right, it's very important that you try to listen to good faith people on the other side of the issue. So thank you so much, Silb, and hopefully we can talk soon.
You were very fair. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Thank you so much. So
bye.
Bye. No, I thought that was a very good call. And, like, the point he makes there is actually, it's not a bad point. Like, that's actually, it is a question of sort of philosophical interpretations of what you think is morally justified in real life. Like, so for example, like if think of it this way, let's say you're the police officer, right? And you fear for your life and you have a family and things like that, right? Should you intentionally put yourself in a position where you're far more likely to die in order to potentially save civilians that are hostile to you, right? Or do you value your own life and your own family and say, listen, I'm not going to put myself in a chance where I'm 80% likely to be killed? Because what Silb's saying there is basically something to this effect. It's like, listen, if you truly care about innocent civilians, even on the other side, then you would not use bombs. Instead, even though Hamas is embedded within civilians and may even use human shields and things like that, you should try to send individuals that will be more precise to only target the specific people. And I could see, particularly if you're on the side of Palestine, why you would reach that decision. And I could see how people that aren't on the side of Palestine would say, yes, that's what ought to happen. But I could also see how the people that then will be willingly putting themselves in a situation where they're likely to be killed would say, no, that's not fair to us. If you took our family as hostage, I shouldn't then have to treat you in a way that it's not commiserate to what you've treated us and risk my life and put myself at a strategic disadvantage by playing into the hands of the very enemies that have kidnapped our people. And so it does become a difficult question. I don't think that I would go as far as Silb saying that they have to put themselves in this particular situation. And the way it's being articulated from him is that, like, it is true that Hamas is embedded within a civilian population. And think of how difficult that is. You know, I've heard people that I know that served in Afghanistan and people that, I believe it or not, I know that served in Vietnam. The difficulty of when you go into a community where you don't know if that civilian is armed with a bomb and may attack you, or that, you know, that civilian may become a human shield, and how difficult that is and how lethal it is for you that's trying to go in there, particularly if it's some sort of rescue operation that you're trying to rescue hostages and things like that. Thank you, Rafilkas, who was also Silb. So it is a difficult question, and depending, and you know, one thing that I think is worth saying is, like, think of what he's saying there. Think of what Silb, Rafilkas, however he wants to put it, is saying there, right? Let's say he's right. Let's say that that's true, which I think directionally he's right, and that's just my gut. That there probably have been Israeli soldiers that have done shit like throw a sonic grenade into a house and make some woman deaf, or, you know, treat people like shit beyond what they should have been. What's that do to that family? You know, I said earlier, from the perspective of an Israeli, I might be able to sit here and be high-minded and say, well, dropping those bombs is too much. But if it was my family, oh, it wouldn't be too much. If I thought that was the best chance to save my kidnapped son, you're damn right. And I understand that's not the best perspective to view the world through. But I'm just being honest with you as a human. But let's put it from the other perspective. Let's put it for, if you have been someone who's lived in pretty much poverty and you're basically just trying to keep to yourself, and the IDF or soldiers of it or it's something like that have, for no reason at all, treated you like garbage and harmed a member of your family. How would that make you feel? Would you be willing to take actions that previously you would have thought were heinous in order to get some sort of retribution or to remove what you thought was an hostile occupying force? Maybe. But I think what this I think the two things that this conversation illustrates, or doesn't illustrate, one that it doesn't and one that it does, is one, I find it indefensible. Again, the people, I think Hamas is a terrible organization. I really do think they do. And I think that it's not morally justified to take hostages, even if you think that it's the only possible way, particularly civilian hostages. I just don't think that we could say it's morally permissible. If it was me and my family, isn't an action I may take? Possibly. But I would understand how it would still be viewed as immoral outside of that in the objective scene. I also think that it's a strategic blunder, because I think he's right that Hamas is the underdog. But because of that, I think that they need to appeal to the international community in a way that makes them more morally righteous than Israel. And I don't think that the idea of taking hostages, let alone even if it was just a few bad apples that went into like a music festival or into communities and killed innocent people, I don't think that's helping accomplish that for objective people. Now, my gut tells me, more than Silb saying there, that I think it was more than just one or two bad apples. I think that Hamas was okay with it. And I think that although they may have intended for their primary targets to be military targets, I definitely think that they didn't have a problem installing fear on the domestic population there. That's my gut feeling. Again, it's difficult, but seeing as how we see actual GoPro footage of some people that were on the ground there, and, you know, they didn't apologize and things like that. I get what he's saying. Why should we hold them as the underdogs to the standard that we would Israel? Well, I think it's because they, more than Israel, need the, you know, international community to view them as more morally just. So that's the first. So having said that, there are certainly people all around the West that aren't involved, right, that have defended the side of Hamas, even when they thought the stories were accurate. Now, again, I said from October 7th on, if your argument was, I do not believe this, I do not believe Hamas did all of these heinous things, maybe one or two things that some rogue person did, but as a whole, I don't believe Hamas chopped the head off babies. I don't believe that they purposely shot babies. I don't believe that they purposely went into civilian areas. That's defensible. Because I have to admit, I have no clue. I know both sides are propagandizing. It becomes more difficult when we're told that this specific GoPro footage from this particular person that's claiming that they're working with Hamas or on the side of Hamas, we see them doing things. But it could be that that's staged footage. When you see an image of that German girl that's like, you know, half naked in a truck and people are celebrating, it could be staged. Like, it could be misrepresented. I have my feelings, my gut feeling on it, but I get it. And so if you're like, I don't believe that, that's defensible. That's fine. Even if we disagree, that's defensible. What's not defensible is saying it's okay for them to do this because they're fighting colonizers. That, particularly from people that aren't directly involved on the ground, I find to be heinous and something that needs to be condemned in the strongest possible terms. That's how I feel. Similarly, if I saw footage of the Israeli government brutally murdering innocent Palestinians on the ground level, shooting Palestinian babies in the face, and then taking hostages, I would say the same thing. Anyone that says, yeah, but Palestine, they're really bad, and blah, 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 I would say that's absurd. So, yeah, I'm glad Rafilkas is saying he agrees. So, and the other thing is, I think there are a lot of people that aren't there that aren't as generous as Rafilkas here in admitting that it is a complicated situation. Even if he is biased, he's able to say, like, this is an ongoing conflict that you're taking snapshots that are occurring in real time and then making these bold proclamations about, you know, one side is always good and one side's always evil. And it's clearly, like any military conflict, it's more nuanced than that. Even when you get as close to possible as that, there's always some sort of nuance. And so for people that aren't there, that have such strong opinions, and if I may be quite honest, many of them don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And I'll fully admit that about myself. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm a student of history and understand the nuances of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't. But because of that, I'm not making bold proclamations about what United States foreign policy should be. And instead, what I do understand is how the United States has oftentimes propagandized and got involved in situations that they've made it worse, that came at the expense of not only the people of the United States, but also the expense of the people that we were told that our government was there to help. The United States government doesn't give a shit about the average Jewish person in Israel, and they don't give a shit about the average Palestinian, and they don't give a shit about the average Ukrainian. To them, it is a power calculus. And so for me, what that conversation illustrates first and foremost is why the United States shouldn't be involved. And Rafalka says he's from West Bank, so he's not sure that he would get along with the average Gazans people with their political views. So for me, that's what it represents. Now, someone like Z will say, well, that makes you a Zionist. I don't think it does. I think that I'm trying to have a nuanced view of this and admitting that I don't understand the ins and outs and admitting I could probably take a person that was born in Israel that would come on to say, I disagree with Rafalkas in his characterization. I think that although he's right that there's no pure good person, I think directionally Israel is better than the Palestinian government. That could be. There could be a conversation that's to be had there, and I would seek to have that conversation. But at the end of the day, what it illustrates to me is it's complicated. And it's not this easy, oh, this is all you have to do, and this is the answer to it. And there are so many people on both sides in this country and around the world in the West that have never been there or that know very little about it, but they're pretending they do. And they prescribe these big, oh, this is how we should be intervening. We shouldn't be. We should keep our nose out of it. There are terrible things that are going to happen going forward on both sides of this. And I don't know how you could think I'm a bullshitter or not, right? that I believe these two things simultaneously, that one, war is hell, and sides are going to do bad things, and they'll feel that it's justified, and it may even be justified to some level. Every large international war in history has had civilians die. And it's terrible. But you can understand why it might be necessary if you feel you're fighting for your life. And so that is true, while it's also true that I don't give a shit about their religion or their ethnicity. Anytime that innocent people are dying, I think it is terrible. And I feel just as strongly about the death of an Israeli child as I do about the death of a Palestinian child. I feel it's my government's responsibility to look out for Americans first and foremost. But as a human being, the death of a child's the death of a child. I think that there are different moral culpabilities in it. If you drop a bomb on a military center and a child happened to be there and they die, it's tragic that that child died, but morally that's not as culpable as breaking into a home and shooting a child in the face. Nonetheless, a dead child's a dead child. If it was up to me, the conflict would end today. The same with the Ukrainian-Russia conflict. But I understand it's complicated. So I think it's funny when people try to distill it down. I think that I can make a moral proclamation on the people that thought that babies were being shot in the face and were like, we don't care, they're colonizers. By the way, those same people think that you as a U.S. citizen are a colonizer as well, if you're not Native American or black. Just to let you know, if the worst ever happened here, how it would be called out. But people that say, no, I don't think Hamas did, the picture that's painted, I don't think it's nearly as bad as what was said, and you have to understand there are horrific things that Israel has done in a similar fashion to civilians. That is a defensible position. It may be wrong. It might be. I don't know. I'm admitting that everyone is biased on this issue, and it's difficult, me being someone who is not familiar with the area whatsoever, who knows that both sides are going to paint things as rosy a picture as possible. I don't know what the specific truth is on many of these issues. It's so difficult. Shit, if you question that, look at our country, right? They'll be like, you can have a Patriot prayer rally. We could all watch the footage live, and 50% of people will say those are patriots that are being harassed by Antifa, and 50% of people are going to say those are domestic terrorists that are threatening people of color. That's in our country, in real time. So what do you think people's opinions are going to be in a place like Israel-Palestine? So, yeah, so I thought it was a great conversation with Rafelkas. Hopefully we could continue that conversation at some point, but it's important, I think, to bring on views of people that disagree. I think that's do I think that the United States has been imminently involved in the conflict for decades, so staying out now would basically be a reinvent of our geopolitical attitude? Yes, absolutely, I believe that, but it's one that needs to take shape. That's what I think. And again, maybe next time I talk to Rafelkas, maybe, again, I don't know that he has any more knowledge than me and you about the military capabilities of like Hamas versus Israel. But given that he said Hamas is the underdog, which I would vehemently agree with when it comes to strength, the ability to prosecute a traditional war, I think most people would agree with that. It was a question I asked in the spaces today. If you're pro-Israel, do you not think that Israel could win this conflict without the United States aid? Maybe they can only do so because the United States has aided them so much in the past. But generally, I do agree with the idea that the United States should stay out of this, and at some point they should do their best to be a mediator and try to have as peaceful as a resolution, just like they should do in Ukraine, Russia. Do I also believe the following things? That the difference between Ukraine and wanting a peaceful resolution and a ceasefire there immediately versus Israel is that Ukraine is the underdog. And so when you're the underdog, oftentimes you have to come to the position of negotiation and give something up, because if the war carries out, then you'll lose. It's the opposite with Israel. Israel is clearly going to want to show strength and go into negotiations from a position of strength. And geopolitically wise, I understand that. I understand it's stupid to ask the government of Israel after this attack on October 7th, don't do anything and go to the negotiating table right now. They're not going to do that because they're traditionally stronger than Hamas. I get that. But there needs to be a time when hopefully we have as peaceful of a resolution as possible. I'd love to see, I think that you have to start with hostages released. That has to be the baseline for a starting point. And anyone who's not demanding that, I think there are an awful lot of people that are hiding their hatred of the West or hatred of Israel and saying, no, Israel shouldn't be allowed to retaliate in any way whatsoever. They need to ceasefire now. It's just veiling the point that actually they just hate Israel, and that's what's going on. So I believe that. But I do believe that ultimately that's the direction we should go. So, all right, I got to go. I got to get down to my man and my wife. I think I'm going to have a fantastic day. Tomorrow, around 11 a.m. Eastern time, we'll be doing another Spaces with John Burk. Please tune into that. Please join that space if you can. I'll be putting that link out there. We want to hear from your voices as well, even if we disagree. I'll warn you, me and John could be aggressive people and could yell at people. Sometimes it just depends on the mood. But I think that we're trying to facilitate a space where all voices are welcome. And I think it's good to get different perspectives on these sort of things. So I hope that you enjoyed this show, and I hope you enjoyed this space. So thank you so much. I'm going to be heading out. I hope you all have a fantastic evening, and we'll see you tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern.